Chapter 789. Zhang Yan rode on the clouds, and after traveling for half an hour, he arrived in front of Qinghong Palace. He slowly descended in front of the hall, and said to the deacon Taoist who was guarding the door, "May I trouble this Taoist priest to pass on a message that Wu Tsong's disciple, Zhang Yan, has already refined the sword pellet, and is here to seek an audience with Sect Master Yu." The Taoist deacon cupped his hands and smiled. "Sect Master has already informed you. If you're here, you can go in." Zhang Yan cupped his hands to him, flicked his sleeve and walked in. He still arrived at the abode from before, and he saw Yu Xianshao standing there with a jade slip in his hand. Yu Xianshao seemed to be carefully reading the jade slip, and he would occasionally draw something on it. Zhang Yan didn't move forward to disturb Yu Xianshao and just waited patiently at the side. After 2 hours, Yu Xianshao put down the scroll and looked at him. He said, "Take out the sword pill and let me take a look." Zhang Yan nodded and guided the Qinghong sword pill out. However, at this moment, the feeling of imperfection appeared in his heart again. At this moment, Yu Xianshao suddenly waved his sleeve. Zhang Yan's heart shook as if he had regained something he had lost. Then, he heard a loud and clear sword chime. In an instant, the entire cave was filled with sword lights. Spiritual qi surged, and buzzing sounds could be heard. When he calmed down, he looked around and saw a total of 108 sword lights floating in the room and slowly circulating around him. Yu Xianshao sighed. "You're not a proper disciple, but you can transform into 108 sword lights. With such talent, why aren't you a disciple of Shaoqing? Forget it. It's fate that I can guide you. I can take a look at your sword pill. With this foundation, I can teach you the sword inheritance method. Let me ask you, which branch of the 3 lineages sword inheritance do you want to learn?" Zhang Yan had thought about this before he came, so he didn't hesitate. He cupped his hands and said, "I'm willing to learn the sword transformation method." Yu Xianshao smiled and said, "I don't know if I should say that your luck is good or bad. If you chose the other 2 branches, then I could guide you to look for the elders in the sect. However, since you chose the sword transformation realm, then there's no need for you to run around. The sword transformation realm doesn't follow any rules, and it all depends on your own comprehension. So, I can only pass down my Tao to you. I can't teach you anything." She waved at him and pointed at the table. "Come and look at this jade scroll." Zhang Yan walked up to the table. He was referring to the jade scroll just now. It was spread out on the table. However, the handwriting on it was all written in the erosion scroll, and there were lines of small characters embedded in the gaps between the lines. It should be the trick of the incantation that was deduced from this. And look at the notes. However, it was not written by the same person. His heart skipped a beat and he thought to himself, could it be written by ancestor Qinghong himself? Yu Xianshao said, "Take this slip and read it first. I will only lend it to you for a month. How much you can read will depend on your luck." This Taoist book was indeed written by Taoist Qinghong. The notes in it were interpreted by Taoist Dong Tian, who practiced the sword transformation technique. This wasn't because Yu Xianshao was generous. It was because the sword transformation sect was full of variations. Everyone learned different things, and there were very few precedents. They could only trace back to the source and comprehend the Eroded Runes original book. As for the erosion scrolls, everyone had a different understanding of it. Therefore, the notes of the predecessors could only be used as a reference. If he copied it completely, he would not be able to achieve much. Zhang Yan put away the jade scroll and bowed solemnly. He said, "I will return after a month to return the jade scroll." Yu Xianshao waved his sleeve and smiled. "There is no need. I am not treating you harshly. The people who studied this book in the past only have a period of 1 month. When the time is up, they will fly back. Even if you want to read it for a while, you can't." Zhang Yan nodded and was about to leave. He looked around and saw that the sword ball was still floating around him. With a slight change of heart, the sword ball flew back into his avatar like a tired bird returning to the forest. Yu Xianshao said, "Although your sword ball has been refined, it does not mean that it has been successfully refined. In the future, you still need to nourish it from time to time so that its spirituality will not deteriorate." Zhang Yan hurriedly expressed that he was enlightened. He said, Thank you for your guidance, Taoist. Everyone in the Shaoqing sect refined their sword ball day and night without stopping. Even if their sword ball was slightly inferior to their peers, it did not mean that they would not be able to catch up in the future. This Qinghong sword ball was only for him to temporarily close the distance between them. As for what would happen in the future, it would depend on everyone's luck and hard work. However, Zhang Yan was not a sword cultivator. He only saw it as one of his life-saving methods. Even if his sword technique was not as good as the Shaoqing disciples, it was not something shameful. If he really wanted to fight, he could use many methods and was confident that he would be able to gain an advantage elsewhere. After he excused himself from Qinghong Palace, he didn't purposely not take the sword pellet when he came. As soon as he left the room, he took out his sword. In a split second, a spot of clear light circulated and enveloped his body. From the ground, he plucked a streak of spiritual sword qi that traversed the sky and flew towards Sun Huaying's immortal's cave. Not long after, he entered the sword platform. A profound light flashed in front of him. It was the disciple with the surname Fong. He greeted loudly, "Martial Uncle Zhang, that cave was used to receive guests. It has not been inhabited for a long time. The plants are not flourishing, and the spirituality is not abundant. I have already built another cave for Martial Uncle on the flying altar. Please follow me, Martial Uncle." Zhang Yan did not care where the cave was. Seeing that the disciple had good intentions, he did not refuse and followed him to the high-hanging altar. He asked, "Where's your master?" The disciple with the surname Fong said respectfully, "He seems to have something important. He left the cave in a hurry just now." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Not long after, the two entered a spacious cave. The outside of the cave was filled with flowers and grass. There was even a stream flowing in front of the door. It looked much better than the place he was at yesterday. He praised, "Martial nephew, you are very thoughtful." The disciple with the surname Fong said, "This is what a martial nephew should do." Zhang Yan smiled and took out a bottle of superior pills from his sleeve. He passed it to the disciple and said, "You are a Shaoqing disciple and a disciple of Taoist Sun. I believe you do not lack any external items for cultivation. This bottle of pills was refined by my master. It has the effect of extending severed limbs. I have no use for it now, so I'll give it to you." The disciple with the surname Fong accepted it generously and bowed. "Thank you, Martial Uncle." He bowed again and went down the mountain. When Zhang Yan arrived at the entrance of the cave, he waved his sleeve gently and activated the restriction. He sat cross-legged on the couch and took out the jade slip, opening it slowly in front of him. A month was not a long time, but it was not a short time either. He had to make good use of his time. However, when he scanned through it, his gaze froze. Just now, he did not feel anything. But now, he saw that the inscriptions on the jade slip were swimming around like tadpoles. They were unusually messy and without any order. He could not tell where the end was. Where was the end? The only thing that remained unchanged was the note between the words. He frowned slightly and thought, "According to sect master you just now, disciples of the mortal sword lineage have to study this jade slip. If it's like this, I don't believe that many people can understand it. There must be a trick to it." But why was there no such situation in the cave? After thinking carefully, his eyes suddenly flashed. He took out the sword pellet. With a thought, he commanded the sword light to split into 108 flashing sword lights. He then stared at the jade slip. As expected, the sword light appeared. The inscriptions on the jade slip seemed to be attracted. They no longer ran around randomly and settled down. But after a while, then they all took their positions. He shook his head. Fortunately, he did not neglect this point. If those who were obsessed or thought that it was supposed to be like this and only read the notes, they would have missed the opportunity. After calming himself down, he reached into his sleeve and held the remnant jade. As he looked at the jade slip, he started to deduce. 2 or 3 days later, he looked at the writings of the predecessors and felt a sense of heroism. He thought to himself, "If others can write it, why can't I?" He was extremely talented in the path of inscriptions and had the remnant jade to deduce. He knew that compared to the predecessors, he was only lacking in skills, but he might not lose in this path. Feeling excited, he took a brush, ink, and bamboo slip from the table and wrote down the words he deduced using the inscriptions. He originally wanted to record it in another book after he finished deducing and then hand it to Sect Master Yu for evaluation. However, he did not expect that every time he deciphered a line of inscriptions, the same line would appear in the jade slip. However, he focused all his attention on the remnant jade and did not pay attention to it at all. Just as he was deducing the inscriptions with all his might, a large ship appeared outside the mountain. Majestic spirit clouds spread out for dozens of miles. This ship was pulled by 16 southern cliff continent stone cheilants. There were a total of 1,300 people standing on the spirit clouds. It was an impressive sight as it headed toward the mountain gate of Shaoqing sect. This was the Dharma carriage of the envoy from Yuxiao school. The leader of the ship was the disciple of Dingyang's Zhou family, Zhou Qiao. He was tall and had skin like a baby. He had 5 wisps of beard and a warm smile. His appearance was elegant, and there were 2 stars above his head that flickered like candles. In the last sword battle, Yuxiao school did not obtain Jun Yang's essence, and they even lost 3 disciples. 2 of them were from the Zhou family's direct bloodline. Although the Zhou family had deep roots and could not do much with the loss of 1 or 2 disciples, Shaoqing and Yuxiao, who were also from the 3 great mystical sects, had successfully obtained Jun Yang's essence. With such a comparison, it was undoubtedly a blow to the Mountain Gate's reputation. This time, Qinsong sent an envoy. Zhang Yan had stayed in Shaoqing for 30 years. Although there were rumors that he went up the mountain to practice swordsmanship, Yuxiao school did not believe it. They only thought that the news was deliberately released, but in fact, there were other plans. Thus, they sent the envoy here to test the 2 sects' intentions. The large ship quickly arrived under the 2 mountains, Chueyun and Sunsing. A wisp of cloud in front of them parted, and a handsome Taoist with starry eyes and white teeth came out to welcome them. He greeted them repeatedly, "Taoist Zhou, sorry for not going out to meet you." Zhou Hang took a look at this person's appearance and knew that he was the eldest disciple of Inchuanqiu, Ran Xiushu. He smiled and returned the greeting. "Taoist Ran, you're too kind." Ran Xiushu came up and exchanged some pleasantries with him before leading him to the mountain. Zhou Hang did not speak for a long time. When they were about to reach the funeral home, he suddenly turned around and asked, "Taoist Ran, I heard that when Qinsong's envoy came to your mountain gate, your sect sent people 3,000 miles to welcome them. Is this true?" Ran Xiushu was stunned. He was not a quick-witted person, so he did not know how to answer. Zhou Hang smiled and asked again, "I heard that when Qinsong's envoy came here, your sect opened the mountain gate formation to welcome them as a sign of respect. Is this true?" Ran Xiushu found it even more difficult to answer. When he came here, his master had reminded him to be polite and not to deal with things casually. If he answered truthfully, and the other party asked why he did not do the same for Yuxiao, it might cause discord between the 2 sections. He felt a headache. Zhou Hang snorted and asked again, "I heard that Qinsong's envoy came here to learn your sect's sword technique. Is this true?" He asked 3 questions in a row, but Ran Xiushu could not answer any of them. After a moment of silence, he suddenly shook his sleeve and a sword light flew out and hovered above his head. Immediately, a bright light shone down. Yuxiao's envoy sensed the sword qi on it and his expression changed slightly. Zhou Bao was taken aback. "What do you mean, fellow cultivator?" Ran Xiushu said loudly, "I, Shaoqing, use swords to determine victory and defeat. As long as you can defeat the sword in my hand, you can ask all you want, and I will answer you truthfully. If you lose, don't ever speak again." Floating Astronomy. Chapter 790. Zhou Bao saw Ran Xiushu's reaction, but he did not get angry. He smiled and cupped his hands, apologizing, "I've said too much. Taoist Ran, please don't blame me." After that, he tactfully stopped asking and changed the topic, talking about everything under the sun. Ran Xiushu was a little surprised by his words. He realized that this person was very knowledgeable and knew a thing or two about the matters of the 9 continents. Even if it was some ancient secrets, He was still able to speak with certainty. Furthermore, when he spoke, it was as if he was bathing in the spring breeze, causing people to unconsciously be attracted to him. He was far better than the cultivators that he had met before. He couldn't help but think, no wonder this person was sent out. After settling Yu Xiao and the others in the funeral home, he rushed to Qinghong Palace to report. Ying Chuanxiu saw him enter and said coldly, "I heard that you want to have a sword duel with Yu Xiao?" Ran Xiushu felt awkward. He lowered his head and muttered, "If I don't do this, how can I shut his mouth? Don't worry, I'm just scaring him. The Yu Xiao emissary won't dare to behave atrociously in Shaoqing's territory." Ying Chuanxiu's face darkened. "You're still in the right? Do you know that you're setting a bad precedent? Will Shaoqing not send emissaries to Yu Xiao in the future?" Ran Xiushu pouted. His master had too many misgivings. Since when did Shaoqing's sect have to care about others? Ying Chuanxiu also gave him a warning. The disciples of the Shaoqing lineage all had an unrestrained spirit, especially this disciple who cultivated the supreme sword, and was most particular about doing as he pleased. If he had been present at that time, he probably would not have stopped him. Seeing that he did not say anything else, he softened his tone and said, "If they ask about the Black Tsong emissary again, you can just brush them off. Just try to appease the people from the two sects and not let them meet." Ran Xiushu smiled. "Don't worry, master. They might not have the guts to ask about it again." Although the Yu Xiao school emissary came, it did not affect Zhang Yan at all. Ever since he got the Jade Scroll, he had been deducing the eroded writings in the cave abode every day. Unknowingly, more than 20 days had passed. The entire inscription was not long, only about 1,000 words in total. It was easy to decipher at the beginning, but the further one went, the more obscure it became. It often took a day to decipher more than 10 words. There were only a few days left. However, there were still 100 or so characters that he had yet to deduce. He did not dare to relax and put all his effort into it. In reality, a cultivator at his level would only be able to see 10 to 20% of the runes before the time limit was up and the Taoist book would be taken back by the sect. Only the people in the heavenly abode could watch it from the beginning to the end and comprehend it. Now, he relied on the remnant of the jade to deduce, which was why he was able to see to the end. After another 3 days, when he put down the last stroke, the jade slip suddenly closed before he even had time to take another look at it. He turned into a streak of light and flew out of the cave. At the moment he left, he was shocked to discover that no matter how he tried to recall the runes, he couldn't recall them. It was as if he had never seen them before. However, he did not forget a single word of the Taoist book and the words left behind by the predecessor. He couldn't help but think that this must have been caused by Taoist Master Qinghong's profound Taoist technique. Fortunately, he had already expected this. If he could memorize it, it would be a joke. That 1-month limit was a joke, so he had never thought about it. With his current cultivation and understanding of the runes, he had already reached the peak of the Taoist book and could not go any further. Unless his cultivation reached a higher realm in the future, he would be able to read this book again. Only then would he have a deeper understanding of it. As he was thinking, at this moment, a voice came from outside the cave. "Since I promised sect leader Qin to teach you the Taoist technique, I won't bully you. If you are fated to become a heavenly abode, I will allow you to read this book again." Zhang Yan recognized Yu Xuanxiao's voice. He immediately got off the bed and bowed toward the direction of the Qinghong Palace. He said sincerely, "Thank you, sect leader Yu." The voice laughed and said, "You can thank me when you reach this step." Zhang Yan waited for a while. When there was no more sound from outside, he returned to the bed and read the Taoist book on the table again. Then, he shook his sleeve and turned it into countless pieces. During the past month, he had forcefully comprehended the runes and fought with others without stopping. Even though his foundation was deep, it still consumed a lot of his energy. Thus, he was not in a hurry to cultivate. Instead, he returned to the bed to meditate and adjust his breathing. After a night, he woke up from his meditation. He was already exhausted. He looked at the rising sun outside the cave and thought to himself, "No one can guide me in the Tao of sword transformation. I can only rely on myself to study and explore." I've already stayed in the Shaoqing sect for 30 years. Now that I have this Taoist book that I deduced, there's no need for me to stay here for long. Thinking about this, he immediately wanted to leave. But before that, there was one thing that he couldn't forget. He stood up and walked out of the cave. Then he flew toward the place where Sun Huaying was cultivating. After a while, he arrived at the door and said, "Is fellow Sun here?" A mysterious light flashed, and the disciple with the surname Lu flew out. He said respectfully, "Master just now finished his homework. Martial Uncle Zhang, please come in." Zhang Yan went inside. When he reached the inner room, he saw Sun Huaying waiting for him at the bottom of the stairs. He bowed and said, "Greetings, fellow Sun." Sun Huaying returned the greeting and said with a smile, "After you came back, you went into seclusion for a month. I guess you must have obtained the green jade scroll of the sword transformation sect?" Zhang Yan smiled. There was nothing to hide. As long as he used his sword moves in the future, he would naturally be recognized. He said, "Fellow Sun is right. After receiving Sect Master Yu's gift, I was allowed to study the way of sword transformation. It's just that your sect's techniques are profound. Although I tried my best to comprehend it, I didn't know how much I could learn." Sun Huaying said seriously, "Fellow Taoist, there is no need to be so modest. This Sun knows that fellow Taoist entered the vast Azure Lower Academy with the eroding runes and is an outstanding talent amongst your peers. However, this Sun cultivates the killing sword, so it is difficult for me to help fellow Taoist. However, there are a few fellow disciples who are experts in this field. If fellow Taoist is interested in learning from them, this Sun can recommend them." Zhang Yan was slightly moved. Sparring with others could indeed improve one's swordsmanship quickly, especially when the other party was a Shaoqing disciple. It was a rare opportunity. However, there was a prerequisite. He had to familiarize himself with the swordsmanship, and it would take him at least a dozen years. However, the demonic cave would probably appear in a few decades. As the first seat of the top 10 disciples of Qinsong, he had left the sect for 30 years. Since he had already obtained what he wanted, it would not be appropriate for him to stay any longer. Thus, he said, "Ever since I entered your sect, I've caused many disturbances, so I didn't dare to ask for more. I'm here today because I feel that I've been away from the sect for a long time, so I'm here to bid farewell. However, I have an item that has been in my hands for over 100 years. I'm afraid it's originally in Shaoqing's possession, but I have to hand it over to you." Sun Huaying could not help but ask curiously, "What is it?" Zhang Yan reached into his sleeve and took out a dull sword ball. He said, "Do you recognize this sword ball, fellow Taoist Sun?" Sun Huaying's gaze immediately froze. She took a few steps forward and took it. After looking at it for a while, she said excitedly, "Where did you get this sword ball?" Zhang Yan said, "I obtained this from Feng Haiyang's sleeve after I defeated him in the Stellar Stone Sword battle." Nether Spring Sect? Sun Huaying sneered, and killing intent appeared in her eyes. However, she seemed to have thought of something and sighed. She cupped her hands and said, "Fellow Taoist, don't be in a hurry to leave. Please stay here for a while. This is a serious matter. Let me report it to Uncle Master Ing first." Zhang Yan nodded and agreed. He said, "Where is senior martial brother Miao now? Can you send a disciple to bring me to him?" Sun Huaying said, "That's easy. Just look for my disciple." He informed the disciple with the surname Fong and ordered him to take care of Zhang Yan. Then he hurriedly left. A sword light came from the Pure Swan Palace. Not long after, he arrived at the palace steps. After stating his purpose of coming, he was immediately called in. Ying Chuanxiu was sitting behind the table, and Ran Xiushu was standing beside him. When she saw him entering, she immediately stood up and said, "Martial nephew, quickly show me the sword ball." Sun Huaying took out the sword ball. Ying Chuanxiu took a few glances at it and sighed, "It really belongs to martial nephew Ban. Where did you get it?" Sun Huaying immediately told him the reason. Ran Xiushu was furious. She slammed the table and said, "Since it's in Feng Haiyang's hands, it means he was harmed by him. We must avenge him." Ying Chuanxiu's eyes also contained a hint of coldness. He pondered for a while and said slowly, My Shaoqing's direct disciple was harmed. We can't just let it go like this. However, even if we want to make a move, we don't have to be in a hurry. Then, his tone became stern and he said with concern, "The two of you must not tell anyone about this. Do you understand?" The Devil's Cave would appear in another 30 to 40 years. He had already made arrangements and was just waiting for that time to come. If this matter were to spread out now, the sect would definitely be in an uproar. Everyone would be clamoring for revenge. That would definitely disrupt his arrangements, and that wouldn't be a good thing. Ran Xiushu hesitated for a while and said, "Master, can't we even tell eldest senior brother about it?" Ing Chuanxiu said in a deep voice, "Martial nephew Qingchen is at a crucial moment in comprehending the divine art. There's no need to alarm him." Sun Huaying said, "Although Taoist Zhang has this sword ball, he didn't say anything about it. Now that he's about to leave, he took it out. It's obvious that he doesn't want me to think that he's trying to repay a favor." Ing Chuanxiu nodded slowly and said, "Even though Feng Haiyang is dead, the Wu Song emissary has returned the sword pellet. I have to return the favor." He stroked his beard and said, "But I don't know what I should give as thanks." With Zhang Yan's current status in the Qinsong school, he didn't lack any cultivation methods, divine arts, or cultivation materials. Now that he had even learned his weakest sword technique, he really didn't know what to give. Ran Xiushu thought hard. Suddenly, his eyes lit up as if he thought of something. He said, "Master, why don't we give the sword pool left by Jinren Kuang to Jinren Zhang?" Ing Chuanxiu nodded and his eyes moved. He then lightly patted the table and said, "That's a good idea. This sword pool was refined by a heavenly abode of Shaoqing thousands of years ago. If a sword cultivator fought with a demonic cultivator and their sword ball was contaminated, they could use the water in the pool to wash away the impurities." Unexpectedly, most of the disciples in the Shaoqing sect regarded the contamination of the sword ball as a rare test. They would rather cultivate it themselves than use the water, so it was useless to put it there. Since that was the case, it was better to give it to Zhang Yan as a favor at little cost. Chapter 791. Ran Xiushu saw that his master also agreed to give the sword pond to Zhang Yan, so he said, "The sword pond is in Uncle Master Wei's cave abode. Master, please give me a token so that I can retrieve it." But right at this moment, Sun Huaying took a step forward and stretched out her hand to stop him. "Senior brother Ran, wait." He looked at Ing Chuanxiu, who was sitting in the hall, and cupped his hands. "Uncle Master, it's not appropriate to only give the sword pond." Ing Chuanxiu glanced at him and stroked his beard in silence. If the Shaoqing sect's sword pellet was lost outside and someone brought it back, they would reward them handsomely. On the surface, it seemed that this was the rule for the Shaoqing sect to enshrine the sword pellet in the sword platform. However, there was a hidden meaning behind it. All Shaoqing direct disciples had a spell scroll in their sword pellets. Even if the sword master passed away, as long as the sword pellet was not completely destroyed and returned to the sect, they could use it to see how the person lost the battle. If they could understand it, they would be able to take note of it next time. Its value was immeasurable. However, this matter was extremely secretive. In the Shaoqing sect, apart from Taoist Paradise, only a few Yuanying cultivators knew about it, and Sun Huaying was one of them. Obviously, he felt that this favor was not small, and it was not enough to repay it with a sword pond. Seeing that Ing Chuanxiu did not speak for a long time, Ran Xiushu turned around and said, "Then what does junior brother Sun think I should give?" Sun Huaying said in a deep voice, "Although I don't owe people favors, why should I be in a hurry to return it? It's easy to add flowers to embroidery, but it's hard to send charcoal in the snow. The tribulation is approaching, so if fellow Taoist Zhang has anything to ask of me in the future, I'll help." Ing Chuanxiu sighed. It would be best if he could return the favor on his own. In the future, he might have to pay a higher price. Perhaps the disciples in the sect did not care, but it was difficult for him as the head of the sect. However, Sun Huaying's words were reasonable, so he could not refuse. He could only say, "Then let's do it." In the morning sun pavilion, Zhou Hang was reading a book. It was a geographical record of the 15 countries around the Great Yu Mountain. Cultivators often lived for hundreds of years, and they often watched the dynasties change. If it was a profound race family, he wouldn't have any interest in mortal matters, but he still watched with great interest. Sometimes, he could even see some unusual things in it. At this moment, the bamboo curtain was lifted and a beautiful woman with her hair tied into 2 buns entered the pavilion. He bowed. With a sweet voice she said, "Shifu, your disciple is here." Zhou Xian put down the Taoist book and said with a smile, "Chanju is back, did you find out anything?" After the incident with Ran Xiushu, he no longer sought a rebuff. He only ordered this disciple to find the Zhou clansmen who had become Dao companions with the Shaoqing disciple to gather information. Chanju was about to speak, but hesitated for a moment. Her beautiful eyes looked around. Zhou Kai could tell that she was worried, so he waved his hand and said, "Don't worry, I've already laid down a restrictive formation here, so you can speak without worry." Although with the temperament of the Shaoqing cultivators, they most likely wouldn't come to spy on them, it was never too much to be careful since they were in someone else's territory. Chanju visibly relaxed and said, "Shifu, I went to visit the elder sisters, but the information I received was all vague. However, there's one thing worth paying attention to. A month ago, there was sword qi surging from the Tiantai sword furnace in the Shaoqing sect, and the light pierced through the sky. It was rumored that an elder with the surname Shui refined a good sword pill. However, after asking around, I found out that this elder is not famous normally, but everyone knows about it. This is a little strange, and there are traces of it being deliberately covered up. Thus, I guess that it was done by Zhenrenzhang?" Zhou Kai revealed a surprised expression and said, "Refining a sword? Are you sure?" Chanju said, "I asked several people, and they all said so. It should be correct." Zhou Kai stroked his beard and thought of the rumor that Zhang Yan came to Shaoqing to learn the sword. He frowned and said, "Could it really be this?" Chanju looked at his expression and said gently, "Shifu, Zhenrenzhang is not a Shaoqing disciple. Even if he learned the sword technique, he might not have any great achievements, so why be troubled?" Zhou Kai shook his head. It was not important that Zhang Yan learned the sword technique, but what was important was the matter behind it. From this, it could be seen that the Shaoqing and Qinsong sects were much closer than before. This was not good news for Yu Xiao. He thought for a while and said, "Did you find out where the Qinsong envoys are staying?" The female disciple lowered her head and said, "Please forgive me, Shifu. I'm useless and did not find out where they are." Zhou Kai waved his hand and said, "You can't be blamed for this. It should be because Shaoqing deliberately covered it up." Thinking of this, he could not help but feel a little worried. However, from welcoming the envoys at the mountain gate to Shaoqing's behavior later on, he clearly felt a sense of alienation. He thought to himself, "Looks like I have to report this matter to the ancestor as soon as I return." At the southwest direction of the Great Yu Mound, on the Sunglow observation platform, a sword light flew over and circled in the sky before dispersing. Zhang Yan stepped out from it. He looked at a temple below and landed on the cloud. When he reached the stairs, Jing Yu in the temple had already sensed him and ran out to welcome him. He said happily, "Greetings, master." Zhang Yan asked, "Where's senior brother Miao?" Jing Yu said, "He's here. He's playing chess with a few elders." Zhang Yan walked into the temple, past the main hall, and arrived at the backyard. He saw Miao Kun playing chess with an elder under a peach blossom tree. The other 3 elders were watching from the side. When they noticed his arrival, they all stood up to greet him. Miao Kun looked over and pushed the chessboard away. He laughed and stood up, saying, "Junior brother Zhang, you've been gone for 30 years. I've asked the people in Shaoqing, but they all said you don't know where you went. If I don't see you in a few years, I'll have to go to the mountain gate to ask for reinforcements." Zhang Yan knew that he was joking and did not say much. It was better for fewer people to know that he was here to learn swordsmanship. The 4 elders knew that the 2 of them had something to say, so they all took their leave. Miao Kun gestured for Zhang Yan to sit down and asked with concern, "Junior brother, did you get what you wanted?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I've gained something, so I won't return empty-handed." Miao Kun said repeatedly, "That's good, that's good. But I wonder, when will we return? Zhang Yan smiled and said, Senior brother, you can't wait? Miao Kun grumbled, Junior brother, you don't know. The people in Shaoqing are very boring. They're either cultivating or fighting with their swords. There's no good wine or good food in the sect, and there's no dancing or music either. How can it compare to being free and unfettered in one's own residence? He originally wanted to go out for a few rounds, but the Shaoqing disciples knew that he was the nominal disciple of the Qinsong sect leader. Once he went out, they would find an excuse to ask for advice. He was in a dilemma. If he agreed and lost, he would lose face for sect leader Qin. If he didn't agree, they would think that he was a coward. At first, he used words to deal with them, but later on, he had no choice but to use seclusion as an excuse and hide in the temple. Zhang Yan looked at him and said, Senior brother, please wait for a few more days. Miao Kun was delighted. He said, Oh? Really? He hesitated for a while. He asked carefully, Junior brother, you seemed to be in a hurry when you left. May I ask if it has anything to do with the Yuxiao envoy? Zhang Yan laughed heartily and said, Senior brother, you're worrying too much. What does the Yuxiao envoy have to do with me? I just thought that I've been away from the sect for a long time and wanted to return earlier. Miao Kun heaved a sigh of relief and said, That's good. Zhang Yan had not heard any news from the outside world for a long time because he was refining his sword. After exchanging a few words with Miao Kun, he asked about the matters outside the mountain. Miao Kun said, Ever since Junior brother came to Shaoqing, the continent has become much more stable. It's obvious that the devil sect is afraid of our two sects joining hands. I think that if our three mystical sects can join hands to deal with this situation and advance and retreat together, we should be able to deal with the devil calamity. Zhang Yan smiled. Miao Kun did not have a high position among sect leader Qin's disciples, so there were some things that he did not know. If the three mystical sects joined hands, they would have to be determined to completely wipe out the devil sect. However, the fact was that the three sects needed to suppress the Genin demon on their side, so they would definitely not do such a thing. It was best to maintain the current situation. It was no wonder that when Shaoqing came into contact with Qinsong school, Yu Xiao was so anxious and immediately sent an envoy over. The two sects had not interfered with each other for thousands of years, but there must be a reason for them to suddenly get close. If it was in the past, it would be fine, but now that there were 3 heavy tribulations in 1,000 years, how could Yu Xiao be willing to be excluded? After asking a few more questions, he confirmed that nothing major had happened in the past 30 years, so he found a side courtyard and went to study sword techniques. On the second day, Ran Xiushu came to find him and personally handed over the sword pool. She said that it was a gift to return the sword pellet and asked him to accept it. Zhang Yan didn't refuse and accepted the kindness. He then packed up and went to the Qinghong Palace to bid farewell to Ying Chuanxiu. Then he went to Sun Huaying's place to bid farewell. When he came out, he drove the twin dragons flying carriage back to the mountain gate with Miao Kun and the others. Due to the huge commotion, Zhou Kai, who was in the funeral home, also received the news that the Qinsong envoy had left. Chan Zhu saw that he seemed to be in a bad mood, so she lowered her head and thought for a while. She bit her lips and said, "Teacher, I have a plan that might be able to bury a thorn between Shaoqing and Qinsong sections." Zhou Kai responded with an "oh," and said with a smile, "Chan Zhu, you have always been intelligent. Maybe you really have a good plan. Tell me about it." Chan Zhu was a little shy when she heard his praise. She lowered her head and said, "Zhenren Zhang must not have left the Shaoqing mountain gate yet. Teacher can go out and intercept him now and talk to him. You can pretend that it was unintentional and reveal that Zhenren Zhang and Zhou Nyangzi were once fated. This way, Shaoqing will definitely be suspicious." Zhou Kai shook his head. This method was too presumptuous. If the two sects really had a plan, how could a few words sow discord between them? Moreover, although Zhang Yan and Zhou Yuchu were once husband and wife, that was a secular marriage. In the eyes of cultivators, they were not real Dao companions. Perhaps small sects would attach great importance to this relationship, but how would large sects like Shaoqing and Qinsong care about this? Moreover, This matter seemed to involve a secret that even he was not very clear about. It was definitely not something that could be brought up to the public. Even if it was really revealed, it would be embarrassing for the Zhou clan of Dingyang. Chan Zhu saw that he did not accept it and said anxiously, "Teacher." However, Zhou Kai's face sank and said, "There's no need to say any more. Using such methods is the behavior of a despicable person. How can I do that? Don't mention this again. Otherwise, you're not my disciple. Do you understand?" Chan Zhu had never seen her teacher so strict. She was so scared that her face turned pale. She nodded repeatedly and did not dare to say another word. Floating astronomy. P.S. There's a guest at home. I'll take some time to write a chapter. There's still one update. I won't go back on my word. I'll upload it around 15 tomorrow. Many readers seem to have seen Qidian's dream realization plan and have given me support. I'll thank all my readers for their support. I've been writing about this for more than 2 years now. What touched me the most is that I've received the affirmation of many of my book friends in the process of writing. Every time I receive your praise, I feel a sense of joy that comes from both my body and mind. Thank you for giving me the motivation to write. Your happiness is also my happiness. As for those who point out my mistakes and shortcomings, I humbly accept them. As the author of Qidian, I've put a lot of effort into this book. I've always hoped that my book could be published, but it was delayed due to various reasons. Now, Qidian's dream realization plan has given me such a chance. As long as I can collect enough money within the specified time, Qidian can be published. When I reach a certain amount, the physical book will be delivered to my readers. If I fail, the funds and Qidian coins will be refunded. I'm not going to say anything sensational. I just sincerely hope that my readers who love this book will support Qidian and help it realize its dream. Chapter 792. Zhang Yan and the others returned to the clear darkness heavenly lake from Shaoqing. After receiving the greetings of the disciples, he set up the sword pool in the cave abode and went to the floating celestial palace to report. He wanted to invite Miao Kun along, but the latter did not dare to meet the sect master, so he could only go alone. When he arrived at the front of the hall, he was called in by the deacon boy. When he entered the inner hall and saw sect master Qin, he immediately bowed and said, "This disciple's trip was smooth. This is a letter from sect master Yu, asking me to pass it to you." He raised his hands and presented a letter to her. This letter was given to him by Ying Chuanqiu before he left, and he solemnly instructed him to pass it to sect master Qin. Although this action seemed normal, he had a vague feeling that the sect leaders of the two sects seemed to be planning something big. Sect master Qin took a look at it, and the letter flew up and slowly landed in front of him. He picked it up, opened it and scanned through it, then kept it. He said calmly, "Since you've learned the Shaoqing sword art, then go back and cultivate properly. When the Devil's Cave appears, I hope that you'll be able to raise the prestige of my Baitsang." Zhang Yan said, "In the next 30 years, disciple will make arrangements to deal a heavy blow to the 6 demon sections." Sect Master Qin nodded and smiled, not saying anything else. After Zhang Yan bowed, he left the hall and took up his sword to break through the astral wind, flying like a meteor. Not long after, he left the Dragon Abyss Lake and returned to the clear darkness heavenly lake. After entering the residence and sitting down, he could not help but fall into deep thought. When he obtained the divine sealing pure hut that day, he guessed from the pill jade that there were still 60 years before the Devil's Cave would appear in the world, but he could not confirm it completely. Just now when he probed with his words, sect leader Qin did not deny it, so it was obvious that this guess was true. Then he had to make arrangements earlier. Once the demonic cave appeared, the top 10 disciples of the Qinsong school would have to fight, regardless of whether they were willing or not. But it was unknown if it was because of the demon sect's luck. 30 years later, Xiao Sha, Zhuang Bufan, Luo Qingyu, Han Sui, and the others had all left their positions. Du De, who had gone to Daylight Hall to become an elder, had lost half of the original 10 disciples. At that time, the people who would replace them would only be at the core transformation stage, so they wouldn't be of much use in this battle. Fortunately, during the years he had been in Shaoqing, Qin Feng and Feng Kong had both attained Yuanying, so they still had some combat power. As for completely shattering and suppressing the demonic cave, only the people of the heavenly abode could do it. However, once a cultivator reached this realm, as long as it didn't involve the safety of the sect, they would be able to do it. They wouldn't easily make a move. Therefore, they still needed the disciples to decide the victor, just like the players behind the chessboard. In comparison, he was still a chess piece. It was just that he was relatively more important than the others, and couldn't be easily destroyed. However, if he could successfully suppress this devil's cave this time, he would be able to do so. In the future, he would have a chance of becoming the chess player. Zhang Yan knew his shortcomings. Without the heavenly abode as his master, his foundation was a little unstable. At the moment, everyone was pressured by his past achievements, so no one made trouble for him. However, once he failed, someone would definitely come out to reprimand him, and the outcome would be hard to say. Although the sect leader could protect him, the path to the Grand Tao would definitely be blocked. However, the path towards the Great Tao would definitely be obstructed. That was why this battle was extremely important. They had to go all out. However, before he wanted to fight, he had to know his enemy. Even though he was the top of the 10 disciples of the Qinsong school, he knew the details of the 6 demon sections. However, he didn't know much. It wasn't that the sect didn't try to find out, but because of the characteristics of the 2 sects' cultivation techniques, it was difficult for the people in the Xianmen sect to find out any valuable information. He fell into deep thought. His gaze darkened. The chess piece that he had buried more than 200 years ago could now be used. At the same time, in the palace on the 10th floor of the heavenly lake of clear serenity, spiritual energy suddenly surged in a cave room. It was like a rising tide, rising steadily. There was also the sound of thunder from time to time. However, because it was deep in the cave, it was surrounded by layers of restrictions, so it wasn't noticed by others. After a few hours, all the spiritual energy calmed down, and the door of the cave opened. A tall and strong cultivator walked out steadily. He had a square forehead, bright eyes, a short mustache on his chin, and his shoulders were extremely wide. He looked calm and powerful, and there was a thick cloud on top of his head. At first glance, he looked like a turtle's back, but at second glance, he looked like a precious pill. A white-haired servant in front of the door was originally sleeping outside. At this moment, he was suddenly awakened. He looked up and rubbed his eyes. Then he was surprised and happy. He said with some uncertainty, Are you master? Is it master? Tian Kun grunted and said, It's me. The old servant suddenly became excited. For some reason, he felt sad in his heart. He knelt down and hugged Tian Kun's legs. He said, It's been 50 years, I finally see master again. He was a servant of the Wang family. After he came to the residence, he only saw Tian Kun once. However, this was considered good. After his 2 predecessors entered the residence, they didn't see Tian Kun even once until they died of old age. Although he cried with tears and snot, Tian Kun didn't feel disgusted. He asked, Is master in the residence? The old servant was stunned. Then he said awkwardly, I don't know about this. He patted his head. Master has come out of seclusion. I'll go and report to Madam. Tian Kun didn't stop him. He said yes and looked at the back of the hunched back leaving. He stood at the same place and waited quietly. Not long later he smelled a fragrance. Then, Wang Kating's figure entered his sight. She looked over and suddenly brightened. She said in surprise, Senior brother, you've cultivated yuanying? Although Tian Kun had been in seclusion for more than 100 years, he and Wang Kating were both cultivators. Their lifespans were long. Even if it was something that happened more than 100 years ago, it was as if it was yesterday. He didn't feel unfamiliar just because he hadn't seen her for a long time. He immediately smiled and said, I've just made some progress. Junior sister, is master in the residence? Wang Kating came up and held his hand naturally. She said, Master has just returned from Shaoqing. Senior brother can go and visit him. Tian Kun paused and said, I've been in seclusion for a long time. I don't know what's going on outside. Junior sister, can you tell me some important things so that I don't embarrass myself when I meet master? Wang Kading pouted and said, "With me by your side, how can senior brother embarrass himself? Feel free to visit him." As she said that, she dragged him to Zhang Yan's residence. Jioling sect, soul leading cave. Su Ang was refining the flag in his hands. Black smoke rumbled around him and there were numerous spirits crying out. At this moment, his heart jumped and his expression tensed up. He instantly noticed that Zhang Yan was calling him. He looked around hurriedly. Even if he was in his own residence, he was still wary of the methods of his fellow sect members. He was afraid that someone would notice that something was wrong. He looked around a few times and confirmed that no one had done anything to the surroundings. Only then did he enter a meditative state and try his best to sense with his mind. After a long time, he came out from his meditative state. Although he couldn't speak, he could vaguely sense that Zhang Yan had ordered him to find out about the actions of the demon sect over the past few decades. That day, after he was released by Zhang Yan, he tried to snatch the body of a demon sect cultivator and then joined a small demon sect. He wanted to find a chance to join one of the 6 demon sects. However, he didn't expect that an envoy from Jioling's sect would choose him and want him to become a disciple. His bloodline was under Elder Kaidin. Although his position in the sect was not low, there were more than 100 disciples, and only 2 of them were outstanding. Both of them had entered the nascent soul realm. His master, Lu Gu, had entered the sect early, but he was only at the first level of the core transformation realm. He was one of the people that was not valued the most. However, that was also the case. He didn't pose much of a threat to his fellow sect members. Thus, he got along well with his senior and junior brothers. As such, he saved a lot of effort when dealing with the 3rd-generation disciples. If he had an arrogant master who looked down on his fellow sect members, it would be tough for him to do anything. During these few years, he had asked around and found out about many things. Although these things weren't really secrets within the demon sect, they weren't things that Xianying's sect could easily find out. He decided to think of a way to send them out. However, he couldn't do it with a flying letter as it would be taken away by others. He had to leave Jioling's sect before he could do anything. He pointed and the black smoke was kept into the flag. He then kept it and exited the cave. After confirming the direction, vengeful energy rose up from beneath his feet. Wrapping his body, he followed a deep tunnel and flew downwards. The mountain gate of the Jioling sect was the most secretive out of the 6 great demon sections. Other than the elders, no one else knew where the spirit cave was. As for the disciples of the sect, it was even more rare for them to gather together. They were usually separated by hundreds or even thousands of miles. In fact, even if they were to bump into each other occasionally, they would never see their true bodies. Thus, they did not bump into a single person along the way. After flying in the underground tunnel for about an hour, he arrived in front of an inconspicuous cave. Below him was a well that had been frozen by the cold air. Without any hesitation, he jumped in and broke through the ice surface. Using the water channel, he swam for a few miles and rushed upwards. As soon as his feet touched the ground, he arrived in a beautiful courtyard filled with the fragrance of flowers and the chirping of birds. 100 steps away from him was an exquisite bamboo building. Several peacocks were pecking on the ground, and there were also 4 or 5 beautiful women playing, pushing swings and throwing pots into the water. Su Ang's body was handsome. The few girls all looked at him with burning gazes. However, he didn't look at them and just walked towards the bamboo building. If others were to be fooled by his appearance, how could he not know that this was a spiritual baby that his teacher had refined? Apart from the outside being a piece of human skin, the inside was empty. There was only a ball of blood-corroding energy. After entering the building, he saw that there was no one here. However, he didn't find it strange. He knelt down and kowtowed, "Disciple greets teacher." Suddenly, a cloud of smoke spurted out from the ground and a person appeared. However, he was wrapped tightly with a flag that was filled with talismans. Only a pair of watery eyes could be seen. A gentle female voice rang out, "Disciple, why have you come to my place?" Su Ang didn't dare to raise his head. He said, "Teacher, Disciple has been in the sect for a long time. Although my cultivation level has improved, I have too few methods to protect myself. Thus, I'm asking for permission from teacher to go out and find fated chances so that I can cultivate divine arts and Tao techniques. Lu Gu sighed and said, if you want to go, teacher won't stop you. However, remember not to go to the Qinsong school's territory. Zhang Yan's methods are amazing. He can control the 3 great Yuanian cultivators in his sect to work for him. If you encounter a Qinsong disciple, avoid them if you can. There's no need to face them. Su Ang made a grateful expression and said, disciple thanks teacher for the advice. Lu Gu reminded again, teacher's aptitude isn't good, but your talent is better than teacher's. Protect your life well and be careful. In the future, your name might be on the myriad spirit rock. Disciple will remember teacher's teachings. Su Ang bowed again and received the talisman to leave the mountain. He excused himself and came up to the surface with his pill chi. Chapter 793. Zhang Yan stood in the cave abode with his hands behind his back, looking at the stone wall in front of him. It was obvious that it was filled with densely packed words. These were all the notes of the predecessors from the Shaoqing Green Jade Scroll. Due to the lack of time previously, he only glanced at it briefly and memorized it. He didn't study it in detail. Now, he could look at it in detail and compare it with the spell he had read so that he could learn from the strong points to make up for the weak points. It was just that after looking through it, he realized that among all the notes left behind by the Taoist grotto heaven, 4/5 of them were directed towards the Tao path of splitting thousands of sword lights. He nodded. This method was indeed the right path. Once it was cultivated to a deep level, the vast sword aura would be unleashed. If the opponent didn't have any powerful methods, they wouldn't be able to fight against it head-on. As for the remaining few, most of them used the Tao of sword formation. It was just that this method was extremely difficult to cultivate. It required the cultivator to be proficient in the Tao of formations. Moreover, there were only a few formations that could be set up. Once they fought with others, they would have to think of a way to change it. Otherwise, if they were seen through by others, they would be at the mercy of others. Zhang Yan's eyes were sharp. He could see that there was actually a huge flaw in this method. After the cultivator set up the formation, not only would it consume a lot of magic power, it would also lose the advantage of the sword escaping freely. It was fine to use it once or twice, but once the opponent was on guard, it would be easy to be tricked. However, he also understood that since he could see this, the Taoist grotto heaven wouldn't ignore it either. They would definitely think of ways to make up for their shortcomings. However, in this way, compared to those cultivators who studied the Tao of sword formation and had no distractions, they were left behind. He thought for a while and looked at the Tao of sword formation that had the least number of people. This was an unorthodox method of incorporating it into the sword. There was no reference, so its might couldn't be estimated. However, in the notes of these seniors, they all mentioned that it was difficult to go through splitting the sword lights, and they weren't proficient in formations, so they turned to this method. Looking at it that way, if following the right path was the superior method, and the sword formation was the intermediate method, then this method was considered to be the inferior method. Zhang Yan thought about it carefully, then shook his head. He didn't see it that way. A technique that could be used by Taoist Dongtian alone. Both were extremely difficult to find in the outside world. The problem was not the cultivation technique, but whether it was suitable for him or not. The people of the Shaoqing sect spent their entire lives studying swordsmanship. They focused on swordsmanship and supplemented it with other methods. Thus, both their offensive and defensive Daos revolved around the flying sword technique, and this was what they were most proficient in. However, he was not a swordsman who only believed in the sword. He could not accommodate the swordsmanship. Instead, he had to find a way to make it his own. Apart from that, he had another reason. Although the green jade slip contained the sword technique, however, there were no divine abilities. When fighting with others, only with a combination of divine abilities and sword techniques could the power of the flying sword reach its peak. Now that it was missing a link, it was like it was crippled. However, Shaoqing allowed him to read the ancestral master's legacy because he owed sect Master Qin a favor. He could not ask for more. Furthermore, it was not so easy to cultivate the Shaoqing divine power. It needed to be matched with the cultivation method. The fundamental cultivation method that he cultivated was the 5 directions 5 elements supreme mystery true technique. It was not on the same path, so it was impossible for him to divert his attention to cultivate other cultivation methods. As a result, he could not walk the proper path of a Shaoqing disciple. With these thoughts in mind, he started to think, how should he unleash the greatest power of this sword transformation technique in his own hands? Now that he had 108 sword transformation techniques, it was impossible for him to create more sword lights in a short period of time. This was something that he had to slowly train with his cultivation method. Even if he had deduced the technique, he would not be able to do it without cultivating for hundreds of years. As for the Tao of sword formation, it was rather suitable for him. He was rather proficient in the Tao of formation. Even if he did not have the sword escape technique, he still had the minor heavens movement escape technique and the 5 elements escape technique. He would not be limited to one place. However, after thinking about it again, he realized that it was too limited. He did not need to use the sword to achieve his Tao, so he did not have to consider many things that he had to avoid. It was fine as long as he could increase his combat power. So why not try to use the strengths of both? As for whether he could still create thousands of swords in the future, there was no need to think about it now. If he had the opportunity, he would naturally succeed. If not, it was fine. After deciding on the path he wanted to take, he was about to practice the spell when outside the door, Jingyu said with joy, "Master, Tian Dalong has cultivated to Yuanying and came out. He's waiting outside with Miss Wang. They're about to pay their respects to Master." Zhang Yan was slightly surprised and immediately said, "Quickly call the 2 of them in." Footsteps could be heard from outside. Tian Kuan and Wang Kading came in together and knelt down respectfully in front of the bed. He kowtowed and said, "Disciple greets Master." Zhang Yan said with a smile, "Quickly get up." Tian Kuan bowed again before standing up. Zhang Yan looked up and down a few times and nodded his head. In terms of cultivation foundation, this second disciple was undoubtedly the most stable. He followed Gui Zongyao's guidance, and even though his cultivation level was slightly slower now, his future achievements were limitless. Moreover, there was another disciple in the sect who achieved nascent soul. They had more confidence in dealing with the devil's doctrine 30 years later. After the 3 of them talked for a while, Tian Kuan suddenly said, "Just now on the way here, disciple heard from Kading that Master is currently suffering from a lack of manpower to deal with the devil's calamity. As the second disciple in the sect, disciple is willing to share Master's burden." Zhang Yan said with a smile, "I am very pleased that you have this intention. However, you have rarely fought with others since you started cultivating. Now that you have just achieved Yuanying, I can't just let you go like this. You need to hone yourself." Tian Kuan bowed and said, "Disciple will listen to Master's arrangements." Zhang Yan pondered for a moment before picking up his brush and writing a letter. Then he handed it to him and said, "Take this letter and go to Pinyuan sect to find your junior brother Jiang Zheng. When you get there, you will know what to do." At the moment, there were very few demonic cultivators around Qinsong School, but there were still many on the East Sea. Although he had killed one person last time, most of them had escaped with their lives. It was said that an elder of the Blood Soul sect had returned to the sea and was still staring at Pinyuan sect. However, this sect had Elder Mu, a Yuanying cultivator, and could barely deal with it. There was only one opponent. He was neither strong nor weak, but he was the most suitable opponent for Tian Kuan. Tian Kuan had no objections and went forward to receive the letter. Wang Kading said, "Master, can disciple go with senior brother?" Zhang Yan thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "I will allow it. However, when you are in another sect, you cannot use your identity as a disciple of Qinsong to do whatever you want." Tian Kuan said in a deep voice, "Master, don't worry. Disciple will watch over junior sister." When Wang Kading heard this, she glared at him unhappily and curled her lips. "I'm not afraid that you will suffer a loss. You don't know how to appreciate my kindness. 200 miles away from Green Ox Mountain, Linqing Monastery, Spirit Cave of Turbid Een. 3,000 feet underground. Zhao Yang shouted and shook his body. A wave of smoke that was as black as ink rose behind him. More than 60 ferocious demon heads flew out and bit back and forth in the surroundings. After swallowing more than 100 demons, their momentum stopped. He made another hand seal, and with a roar, they returned to the smoke. He inhaled lightly, and the smoke returned to his body through his mouth and nose, then returned to the golden core in his abdomen. He felt that there was a slight increase in his cultivation in his body. He was very satisfied and thought to himself, no wonder the cultivators of the demon sect can't leave the spirit cave. If I can cultivate here for 100 years, I will definitely be able to reach the 3rd stage. Even my methods will not lose to others. He cultivated here for 30 years, and his strength increased rapidly. He refined another 65 demon heads. He felt that if he met the cultivator of the Yuan Shen sect again, he would not let him escape so easily. However, he did not know that before the devil calamity, there were not enough demon heads in the demon caves of the 6 major demon sects. Those disciples who were not direct descendants could only go to the outside world to kill demon cultivators. Occasionally, they would find the cultivators of the celestial sect. How could they be like him, who could monopolize a spirit cave? He swallowed and refined the demon heads without restraint. According to his previous plan, he would cultivate here for a few years. After he had a method to prevent people from spying on his mind, he would go to the Nether Spring sect. But now that he had tasted the sweetness, he did not want to leave. At this moment, he suddenly felt a strange spirit. His expression changed, thinking that it was a disciple of Linqing Monastery coming here. This situation had happened several times before. After all, he cultivated the cultivation method of the demon sect, so he did not want to meet them face to face. He used the Yellow Springs escape technique and flashed into the stone wall on the side. After a while, he saw a flash of smoke, and then a cultivator in white landed on the stone that just now was sitting on. His eyes flashed and his nose twitched. He was a little puzzled, hesitated, and asked tentatively, "May I ask which fellow Taoist is here?" He called out a few times, but Zhao Yang did not respond. The cultivator turned around on the spot, and after a while, he suddenly stood up and turned into a black smoke, escaping downwards. Zhao Yang thought for a while, then came out of his hiding place and quietly followed. However, not long after he left, a puff of smoke came out from the stone not far away. Then, the white-robed cultivator appeared again. He stared at Zhao Yang's departing figure, narrowed his eyes, and leaped out, following behind him. After Zhao Yang chased for a few miles, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. He felt that the smoke in front of him was a little strange. It was stiff and did not seem to be controlled by someone. As soon as this thought appeared, he immediately became vigilant, and his figure stopped. At this moment, a voice suddenly came from behind. "I am Chu Jingong of Hunqing sect. May I ask if fellow Taoist is from the Nether Spring sect?" Zhao Yang suddenly turned around, but did not see a figure. The voice came from behind again. "Fellow Taoist, you must have just started your cultivation. Next time, you need to be careful. If you meet someone from the Taoist sect, you might have already lost your life." Zhao Yang immediately broke out in a cold sweat and slowly turned half his body sideways. The other party did not hide again, but stood there and cupped his hands at him, saying, "Greetings, fellow Taoist." Zhao Yang returned the salute and said, "Nether Spring sect. Zhao, may I know what method fellow Taoist is using just now?" Chu Jingong laughed. "This is the magical power of our Hunqing sect, moving forward and backward. Fellow Taoist, have you heard of it?" Zhao Yang then remembered that Zhang Boyan had mentioned this magical power. This method only needed to release a ball of essence nearby, and the cultivator of Hunqing sect could use it to move forward and backward within a certain distance, making it impossible for others to find a trace. But hearing about it was not as good as seeing it with one's own eyes. Now that he had understood the power of this magical power, if he had really been hostile to him, he was afraid that he would have lost his life. He recalled that he had been led by the nose since the beginning. If he did not recklessly chase after them, but first took a look, then he might not have been fooled. This was a loss due to his lack of experience. Even if his cultivation was a few notches higher, he would still have fallen into the trap. At this moment, he made up his mind that he could no longer peacefully cultivate here. He had to go out and have a good experience. Chapter 794. In the stargazing tower of the statecraft courtyard of Qinsong School, Zhang Yan was flipping through the many books stored in the courtyard. Although he had already decided on the method to develop the sword formation, the Shaoqing green jade slip only had a few words on how to arrange the sword formation. There was no cultivation method, so he could only rely on himself to deduce and fumble. He had come here to search for the records of the Shaoqing sword cultivators dueling with others in the past, to see if he could find anything that could be used as a reference. Fortunately, Qinsong was a profound sect that had existed for thousands of years. There were many records in this area. In the past few days, he had gained quite a bit. An ordinary Yuanian cultivator would not be worthy of his attention. Even if he did not rely on his flying sword, he would be able to deal with him easily. Once the Devil's Cave was revealed, he would definitely face off against the cultivators of the Devil sect who were also in the third stage of the Yuanian realm. Anyone whose cultivation had reached such a level would have one or two tricks up their sleeves. Even if they were unable to defeat their opponent in battle, they would still have a way to escape and would be unable to kill their opponent. Thus, even if they won, the results of the battle would be insignificant and would not be taken by them. His objective was that once he encountered Qinshi, he would do everything in his power to make Qinshi stay, and he couldn't allow Qinshi to have the slightest chance to turn things around. Third-stage cultivators were rare even in the profound sect, not to mention the six sects and the devil sects. Among them, there might be some who could achieve the heavenly abode in the future. If one or two of them could be eradicated, it would be equivalent to injuring their muscles and bones. However, even though he possessed the 5-element escape technique and seal the heavens and the earth seal technique, it was slightly insufficient to rely on them to obtain a chance at victory, whereas with the sword formation, he could add another ability in this aspect. The sword formation was not an ordinary formation. It could not borrow the spiritual opportunity of the earth vein. The power it obtained came from the cultivator himself. Therefore, there were not many changes. The key was to trap people, not to kill. Because of the speed of the sword light, almost no magic treasures could compare to it. Once the enemy was trapped in the formation, they could only defend passively. Even if they had powerful defensive methods, under the slashes of the thunderous sword light, they would not be able to withstand it. Sooner or later, he would be defeated. After another 5 or 6 days, Zhang Yan had already found what he needed. He felt that he had some clues, so he walked out of the pavilion under the respectful gaze of the deacon Taoist. At this moment, 2 women walked over. The one on the left was wearing a tight-fitting robe with a long scarf wrapped around her arm. She had a pretty face, and beside her was a girl in her 20s. She wore a form-fitting dress that covered her knees and waist. Her eyebrows were like willow leaves, and there was a red dot drawn between her eyebrows. Her temperament was gentle and graceful. When the woman in the lead saw Zhang Yan, she quickly pulled her companion to the side and bowed. "Jing Bixin greets Martial Uncle Zhang." Zhang Yan glanced at her and found that she looked somewhat familiar. After pondering for a moment, he asked, "Are you a disciple of Senior Sister Han?" The woman hurriedly said, "I didn't expect Shu to remember my daughter." She then pointed to the woman beside her and said, "This is Shizhi's martial sister, Han Mengde. Junior martial sister, why aren't you bowing to the enlightened one?" Han Mengdai didn't say anything. After hearing his words, she silently bowed. Zhang Yan nodded slightly, flicked his sleeves, and walked out. A moment later, a streak of light flew up into the clouds. Han Mengdai heaved a sigh of relief. Just now, when she stood beside Zhang Yan, she only felt an oppressive aura that made it hard for her to breathe. She couldn't help but secretly exclaim. When she came back to her senses, she gently pushed the woman beside her and complained, "Junior sister, just now, how am I taking care of you? Zhenren Zhang is one of the 10 first seats of this generation. After Master passes away, you will definitely take his place and fight against Xian Mo. It's extremely dangerous." If you can befriend Martial Uncle Zhang, you might be taken care of. It wasn't a coincidence that she came here. She heard that Zhang Yan was reading scriptures, so she brought her junior sister and pretended to bump into him by accident, so that her junior sister could get familiar with him first. Han Mengdai said with a tranquil expression, "It's my fault." Zheng Bixin looked at her desireless and cold appearance and sighed helplessly, "Forget it, everyone has their own fate. I won't force you." After Zhang Yan returned to the clear nether heavenly lake, before he entered, he suddenly saw a letter flying over. He raised his hand and caught it. Seeing that it was a letter from Suong, his eyes flickered, and he kept it in his sleeves. He waved open the formation door and entered the cave. After a short while, he returned to the inner room and sat down on the jade couch. He first took out the bamboo tokens and fiddled with them for a while. Then, he held the remnant jade and started to deduce the sword formation. About half a year later, his consciousness finally came out from the remnant jade. With a thought, a surge of sword chi flew out, turning into a rain of light that shrouded the entire cavern. He waved his sleeves again and kept the sword light. In just a breath's time, the jade table and the lotus flower stone seats on the opposite side had silently turned into a pile of dust. He took a few glances and thought to himself, although this sword formation is formed, I'll only know how powerful it is when I fight with someone. With the help of the remnant jade, he studied dozens of formations in the past half a year. He got rid of the complicated ones and simplified them to create this sword formation. Because this sword formation could not only trap people, but if he didn't care about mana, he could use the formation energy to create a shockingly powerful sword of chi. That was why it was named the Divine Light One-Breath Sword Formation. However, this was a technique he created. Without testing it, it was hard to know how powerful it was. Thus, he urgently needed to find someone to test it on. It was just that after the lesson he taught the demonic sect, they were very well behaved. They were only active in the southeast and southern regions. However, that was the territory of the Yuxiao school. Putting aside the fact that he wasn't on good terms with the Zhou family, even if they were on good terms, it wasn't his place to control them. He stood up and walked to a stone wall in the east. On it was a geographical map of the Donghua continent. After looking at it a few times, he slowly moved his gaze up to the North Dark Star continent. Suddenly, he seemed to think of something. He walked back to the table and took out a jade box. He took out the document and flipped through it. He found that in the past 200 years, the demonic cultivators of the North Dark Star continent had invaded the Donghua continent more often than before. This was mainly because of the demonic calamity. The Qinsong school focused on dealing with the demonic sect, so they neglected the many demon tribes in the North Dark Star continent. After Hu Xian just now took over as one of the 10 first seats, he had once acted together with Han Suyi under his suggestion to eliminate a few demon tribes. However, at that time, they acted in the Donghua continent and didn't pay much attention to the demonic cultivators of the North Dark Star continent. Zhang Yan pondered for a long time. He had been careless before. If these demonic cultivators colluded with the demonic sect and jumped out when the demonic cave appeared, he would have to divert some of his forces to deal with them. He had to be careful. However, if he really wanted these demonic cultivators to settle down, the best way was to kill his way into the North Dark Star continent and intimidate them. However, this was an important matter, and it wasn't something he could decide alone. After thinking for a while, he picked up a brush and wrote a few letters. Then he waved his sleeves, and several spiritual lights flew in different directions. Half a day later, the bell in the floating heavenly palace suddenly rang. Not long after, 11 bright lights flew into the main hall and landed on the jade seats in the hall. However, their faces were blurry, and their shadows were fleeting. They were clones that had arrived. The deacon boy in the hall said, "Master, the 11 Zenrins have arrived." The whole hall suddenly sounded with the sound of water splashing, and then it shook slightly. Sect Master Qin had already arrived at the main seat in the hall and sat down. The 11 Dongtian Zenrins all bowed and said, "Welcome, Sect Master Jinren." Sect Master Qin waved his horsetail whisk and dispensed with the formalities. Then, he said slowly, "Today, I called you all here for one thing. Boy, Take this letter and pass it on. The boy first handed the letter to Meng Zhen. After he read it, he waved his hand gently, and the letter turned into 10 talisman copies and flew up, landing in front of the other Zenrins. Zhenren Yen glanced at them and said coldly, "Attack the North Darkstar continent? How arrogant! Does Zhang Yen think that my Qinsong school is still the same as when my grandmaster was?" Sun Zhenren looked over and laughed. "Senior brother, you have to see it clearly. Martial nephew Zhang is obviously going to the North Darkstar continent to punish the demon clans. He's not going to fight with the 8 demon clans." Zhenren Yen frowned and said, "Junior brother Sun, although the 8 demon clans of the North Darkstar continent are not as strong as before, they still have some strength. If their clans are being slaughtered, how can they sit back and do nothing?" Zhenren Zhu said in a deep voice, "This Zhang Yen is so restless. The demonic cave is about to appear. The 6 demon clans are what my Qinsong school needs to deal with. At this time, we should be calm. If we provoke the North Darkstar demon clan and stir up a dispute between the 2 continents, won't it cause more trouble?" Sun Zhenren sneered and said sarcastically, "Senior brother, I don't like what you said. Since the establishment of the great underworld patriarch, our Qinsong school has never been afraid of anyone. When have we ever been afraid of anyone? If the 8 demon clans of the North Darkstar continent come together, Sun Jian, will resist them. There's no need to trouble senior brother." Zhenren Yen said unhappily, "Junior brother, how can you talk to senior brother Zhu like this?" Shen Baishuang said with a faint smile, "Well said, martial nephew Sunday. I always regret that I was born at the wrong time and didn't make it to the battle of martial uncle in the North Darkstar continent. If he can come, I can't ask for more." As soon as he said this, Zhenren Yen immediately fell silent. At this time, Zhenren Peng, who was sitting at the end of the table, said with a smile, "Dear Zhenren, Zhang Yen is not a person who doesn't know what's important. The North Darkstar demon clan seems to be powerful, but it is actually weak." Gui Songyao died early. The Turtle clan has no successor. The Carp clan and the Python clan have gone to the Outer Sea, and the remaining 5 clans are fighting for the position of the Demon Lord. As long as it doesn't involve the affairs of their clans, they won't pay much attention to it. Sect leader Qin turned his head and said, "What do you think, Zhenren Qin?" Zhenren Qin said unhurriedly, "Now there are 11 people in Qinsong who occupy the position of cave. Although they are not as powerful as martial Uncle Qin at that time, the North Darkstar demon clan can't be compared with them. However, the Devil's Cave is about to come out. If we use our strength in the North Darkstar continent at this time, won't we be neglecting the essentials?" Shen Baishuang chuckled and said, "Senior martial brother's words, I beg to differ. The monster division doesn't learn their lesson. If we don't teach them a lesson, they will inevitably cause trouble during the demonic tribulation." He cupped his hands toward the hall and said, "Senior brother sect leader, in my opinion, Zhang Yan's suggestion is quite feasible." Sect leader Qin didn't comment, but looked at Qin Yu, who was sitting not far away, and asked, "Junior sister, what do you think?" Qin Yu shook her head and said, "I don't have any other opinion. Senior brother, you can arrange it as you see fit." Sun Zhenren looked at her in surprise. This martial Uncle Qin used to want to meddle in everything, but now she was so quiet. He was not used to it. Meng Zhen stood up and said, "Master, the North Darkstar demon clan has been restless recently. Even if Zhang Yen didn't mention it, I would still say it. Although the matter of the Devil's Cave is serious, we can't let our backyard be unstable. It's good for Zhang Yen to come out and suppress them, so that they know who is in charge of these 2 continents." Sect leader Qin nodded slightly and looked around the hall. The 11 cave masters all lowered their heads. Seeing that no one else said anything, he said in a low voice, "Pass down my decree. This matter can be done by Zhang Yen, so that he doesn't have to worry about anything. He has the sect behind him to support him." P.S. Chapter 173 is repeated, but the content is not. It's just that the title is not easy to change, so we can only leave it at that. Chapter 795. Half a day later, the floating wandering heavenly palace sent a boy to deliver the sect master's decree to the clear nether heavenly lake. After receiving the decree, Zhang Yan calmed down. With this item in hand, he could gather people from the sect and attack the North Darkstar continent. After pacing around the room, he said to Jing Yu, "Go and call switching here." Jing Yu bowed and left after receiving the order. At this moment, the mirror in the small pot flashed, and the mirror spirit suddenly came out and said, "Master, spiritual masters Han and Kai and Pengzhenren are outside the cave." Zhang Yan knew that the three of them must have received the news first, so he thought for a moment and said, "Please go to the main hall, I will meet them in a moment." Not long after, Han Zwicheng came to the cave, and after greeting he said, "Master, do you have any instructions for me?" Zhang Yan said, "In a few decades, the demon cave will appear. At that time, the Qinsong school will have no time to care about other places. Now, the demon tribes of the North Darkstar continent are restless, and many of them have entered Donghua. For the sake of safety, I have requested the sect master's decree to enter the North Darkstar continent and kill the demon tribes to deter them. However, I need a disciple to go there to investigate first. Zwicheng, are you willing to go?" Han Zwicheng didn't think that he would be used this time, and was a little excited. He hurriedly said, "I am willing to go, I am willing to go." Zhang Yan looked at him and said, "Then you can leave in 2 days. Report to me if there is any news." Han Zwicheng thought for a moment and said with some embarrassment, "Can I bring Xia with me?" He hurriedly explained, "I am not doing this out of selfishness, but Bu Pavilion is originally from the Nanhua sect, and is good at subduing demons." Zhang Yan smiled and waved his hand, saying, "I understand, but you two must remember to be careful if you go together." Han Zwicheng nodded and bowed, saying, "Master, I will take my leave first." Zhang Yan nodded and watched as she left the room. With the flying star pivot palace in hand, even if this disciple encountered a Yuanying cultivator, he would still be able to escape. Moreover, apart from a small number of Yao cultivators, most of them cultivated the strength path. Their movement techniques were usually extremely poor, so they were helpless against this thing. He waved his sleeves and opened the array door. He stepped inside, and when he came out, he was already in the main hall. When Han Wanka and the others saw him, they quickly stood up and greeted him. After exchanging some pleasantries, everyone took their seats. Han Wanka said, "Junior brother Wen wants to lead the troops to attack the northern dark demon horde. I have nothing to do in the residence. I'm here to see if I can do anything." The last time he killed a few devil sect elders, he had done quite a bit of meritorious service. The sect had already allowed him to pass on his skills and accept disciples. However, he found out from Shen Baishuang that there were at least several decades before the appearance of the Devil's Cave, but he and Kai Rongju had less than 100 years of lifespan left. But once they left, there would be no one to take care of their disciples. Reincarnating into the Tao might not even be possible. Thus, he wanted to establish a good relationship with the bright Nether Lake lineage, so that his disciples could get some help and it would be easier for them to do this in the future. As for Peng Yuzhou, he was under the orders of the sect leader. If something happened to Zhang Yan, he could just summon him here with a talisman. Rather than being ordered around and losing face, he might as well come early. That way, he wouldn't have to hold back his anger. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "My 2 senior brothers and Elder Peng are all highly skilled cultivators. This time, we will need to rely on the 3 of you to attack the northern dark continent." Han Wanka relaxed and said, "I have something to tell junior brother Zhang. Junior martial brother Kai and I also have a junior martial brother named Gu Tongshan. However, when martial uncle Shen brought us back last time, Gu Tongshan didn't show up. When junior uncle Shen brought us back last time, he went to Southern Cliff Continent, so we couldn't find him. We only came back last year and heard about the attack on the Northern Dark Continent. We also want to serve the sect, so I don't know if junior brother can agree to it." Zhang Yan asked, "Does junior uncle Shen know about this?" Han Wanka hurriedly said, "If junior uncle Shen doesn't allow it, we wouldn't dare to tell junior brother. Junior brother Ji's cultivation is also weak, not below mine." Zhang Yan sighed. He had heard that White Sun sect had many outstanding disciples in the past. Later, when they fought with Vicious for sect leader, many of their disciples died in battle. If they were all here now, he couldn't imagine what kind of scene it would be outside. He said, "Since it is Junior Uncle Shen's wish, then I can agree. When Senior Brother Gu has time, he can come to Bright Nether Manor to meet me." Han Wonka was overjoyed. He stood up and bowed, saying seriously, "I thank Junior Brother Zhang on behalf of Junior Brother Gu. When we return, I will tell him to come pay a visit in person." After Han Zwicheng returned to the manor and made some preparations, he told Yen Xie about the trip to the northern Dark Continent. After the two became Dao companions, Yen Xie treated him as her master, so he naturally obeyed. But before he left, he suddenly thought of something. He slapped his head and said, "I almost forgot. Junior Brother Zhao must be board guarding Linqing Monastery. The sect wants to wipe out the northern Dark Continent demon tribe. How can I tell him? Wait for me to write him a letter." After writing the letter and sending it out, the couple set off on their journey. But just as they left Bright Nether Manor, they saw a tall and majestic Taoist standing in the air. Han Zwicheng paused and said in surprise, "Senior Brother Zhao, why are you here?" The cultivator in front of him was Luo Zhao's eldest disciple, Zhao Chong. He cupped his fists and said, "Junior Brother Han, I have been waiting for a long time. I heard that you went to the northern Dark Continent to investigate. My master sent me here and ordered me to go with you and sister-in-law." Han Zwicheng was a little puzzled and said, "What does Junior Uncle Luo mean?" Zhao Chong was a little embarrassed and said, "I won't hide it from you, Junior Brother Han. My father, the Demon King of the Quan He tribe, is a descendant of the Celestial Wolf tribe. He still has many tribesmen in the northern Dark Continent. He might be able to help you on this trip." Before Han Zwicheng could speak, Yen Xie whispered in his ear, "The Celestial Wolf tribe is a descendant of the Celestial Demon tribe. Senior Brother Zhao can be said to be a descendant of the Celestial Demon tribe. With such an identity, it will be much easier for you to travel in the northern Dark Continent. Senior Uncle Luo is very thoughtful." When Han Zwicheng heard this, he naturally agreed. After a few polite words, he invited Zhao Chong to go with him. The three of them continued on their journey. After traveling for more than 10 days, they arrived at the banks of the Shang River. Looking to the west, they could see the majestic shadow of the Shindu Peak. To the north, there were also undulating peaks. The mountains were like the sea, and the clouds were vast. This was the intersection of the Donghua Continent and the North Darkstar Continent. Han Zwicheng gazed at the northern Dark Continent and felt a sense of melancholy. He said, "My grandmother once said that she escaped alone when her clan faced a disaster. Because her cultivation was still shallow back then, she was unable to fly. As a result, she used more than 10 years to walk out of the mountain realm and come to the Donghua Continent. Only then did she form ties with my grandfather in the mountains and have my father." Yen Xie knew that his grandmother was a vixen, but she did not show any disdain. She grabbed his hand and stared deeply at him. "Husband, do you know where the old madam's hometown is?" Han Zwicheng nodded. "I remember when I was young, I always talked about it. It was a place called the Huanghao Continent." Yen Xie said gently, "Husband, why don't we go there after we check out the situation in the Ming continent?" Han Zwicheng said happily, "All right, let's do that." With that, he looked back and saw Zhao Chong standing in the distance. He could not help but smile and call out to him, "Senior Brother Zhao, come over quickly. The atmospheric winds in the Two World Mountains are fierce. Once I release my mount, we'll be able to get there faster." Zhao Chong was an honest man, but he still had a discerning eye. Just now, when the two of them were talking, he had tactfully stayed far away. However, the atmospheric winds were powerful, so unless they walked on the ground, it would be extremely difficult. As a result, he readily walked over and clasped his hands. "Thank you, Junior Brother and Sister-in-law." With a wave of the talisman in Han Zwicheng's hand, a huge red-feathered swallow over 30 meters long was released. The three of them climbed onto its back, and with a flap of its wings, it flew into the clouds with a chirp. The swallow was a wondrous bird that Blue Feather Pavilion had raised with great effort using a secret technique of the Nanhua sect. It was extremely fast, and when it spread its wings, It could travel tens of thousands of kilometers in a day. However, along the way, the three of them noticed that the mountain was filled with demonic aura. There were quite a number of demonic tribes heading towards the south. After a careful count, there were probably no less than 10,000 of them. Among them, there were even a few powerful demonic auras. A few of them noticed the movement in the sky and attempted to fly up to capture the three of them. Fortunately, the Great Yen was extremely agile in its flight and had chosen to travel to remote areas. Thus, they managed to avoid being caught. Han Zhuqing was shocked. No wonder Master said that the demon cultivation in the North Underworld is unstable. If these 10,000 demons reach the Donghua continent and no one takes care of them, who knows how many lives will be lost. These demons were fine in the mountains, and they could catch beasts, fish, and birds for food. However, if they went south to the Donghua continent and could not find enough food to fill their stomachs, then they could only eat humans. Therefore, in the eyes of the demons, they all deserved to be killed. At this moment, Zhao Chong said, "Junior apprentice brother, don't worry. Although there are many demons, as long as we get rid of the leader, there is nothing to worry about. We just need to find out which demons are the most powerful and send a letter to the higher-ups. Naturally, the chief and the demons will take care of them." Han Zhuqing said, "Senior apprentice brother is right. However, there are so many demons. If we can subdue all of them, it will be a great help in dealing with the demonic cultivators." 10 days later, the scenery in front of them changed. As far as the eye could see, there were towering peaks and clouds. The cliffs looked as if they had been carved by knives and axes. The trees were incomparably huge, and the sound of flowing water was deafening. At this moment, a black dot passed by in the sky. When they looked up, they saw that it was a pung bird about 300 feet in size. However, it seemed to see that the three of them were not to be trifled with, so it was also on guard. With a flap of its wings, it suddenly flew into the clouds, and then let out a long cry that gradually faded into the distance. Han Zhuqing thought that this place should be the territory of the demonic cultivators, so he did not dare to be too ostentatious. After discussing a few words with Yen Xie, he landed on a peak. After landing, when the three of them came down, the red swallow chirped, and its huge body shrank, turning into the size of a peacock. Yen Xie saw that this strange bird was a bit dispirited, clearly having worked too hard. She couldn't help but feel a bit of heartache. She hurriedly took out a few pills and placed them by the side of the bird's mouth. The red swallow was quite intelligent. It intimately rubbed against her sleeve, and then lowered its head to peck at the pills. Only then did it recover some of its spirit. Zhao Chong took a few steps forward, arriving at the edge of the cliff in front of him. He looked down, and saw that the clouds were misty, and ancient trees towered into the sky. The lush greenery stretched to the ends of the horizon. The spiritual qi here was inferior to that of the heavenly lake of clear nether, but a single breath was enough to make him feel refreshed, as if he had returned to his mother's womb. He turned around and said, "Junior apprentice brother, wait here with sister-in-law for a moment. I will go investigate." Han Zhuqing thought for a moment. Now was not the time to show off. Zhao Chong was more convenient than him in both appearance and status, so he handed over a talisman and said, "Thank you for your trouble, senior apprentice brother. This is the Star Pivot Flying Palace talisman. Take it to protect yourself." Zhao Chong declined a few times, but when he saw that the other party was determined to give it to him, he accepted it. He cupped his fists in salute, and then rode his pill fiend, leaping down the peak. Chapter 796. 2 months later, a spiritual light came from the north and landed on the clear nether heavenly lake. Zhang Yan was sitting in his cave, deducing a technique. At this moment, he suddenly felt something and opened his eyes. He raised his sleeve and caught the light in his hand. Looking at it, he saw that it was a letter from Han Zhuqing and the others. These days, Zhao Chong had infiltrated the demon tribes with the identity of a heavenly demon bloodline descendant, but he found that the thousands of tribes near the two continents' mountain boundary were all led by a demon tribe called Yuyuan. This tribe's demon king was called Zhubo Gao. There were more than 1 million tribesmen, among which there were more than 20 rank 4 strength path cultivators. This generation's cultivation was equivalent to Chi Path Yuanying cultivators. If they had a Grotto Heaven cultivator, they would be comparable to the 8 demon tribes. Such strength could not be taken lightly, so he immediately sent a letter to the sect to report this matter. Zhang Yan was also a little surprised. He did not expect such a force to be hiding in the neighboring continents, and it seemed that it was related to the demon tribes that had been attacking East Flower Continent for the past 200 years. If he did not eliminate them as soon as possible, when Qinsong fought against demonic sects, they would definitely cause great trouble for him when they went south. He thought for a while and put down the letter. On the table, there were stacks of bamboo slips piled up like a mountain. The disciples of Qinsong school could obtain merit as long as they killed demons, but there was a difference between the two. Demonic cultivators were cunning and ruthless. They would try to retreat at the first sign of trouble. They were extremely difficult to deal with, but killing demonic cultivators was much easier. Thus, when they heard that he was going to attack the North Darkstar Continent's demon tribes, many elders sent the names of their disciples to clear Nether Prefecture. He knew that the time was ripe. It was time to take action. His eyes flashed as he said solemnly, "Jingyu, go and call Zihong." Not long after, Wei Zihong came to the prefecture and bowed. "Disciple greets teacher." Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and took out a token. "This time, you will be in charge of the disciples of the prefectures in the expedition against the North Darkstar Continent's demon tribes. Tomorrow, we will set off for the North Darkstar Continent. First, meet your 7th junior brother. Open a cave there and set up a forbidden formation. I will be there in a few days." Wei Zihong respectfully said, "This disciple will obey your orders." He bowed once more before taking his leave. The next day, he led more than 300 Qinsong disciples. Altogether there were 12 flying star palaces. He headed in the direction of North Darkness Continent. This time, Han Wanka, Kai Rongju, and Peng Yuzhou also went with them. This was to protect them from the side and prevent the Devil Sect cultivators from hearing the news. Sneak attacks. 10 days later, the group arrived at the northern Darkstar Continent. After contacting Han Zwiching and his wife, Wei Zihong did not stop for even a moment. He immediately led the group to kill the surrounding demon tribes. These demon clans of the North Underworld never expected that cultivators of the Dark Azure sect would suddenly attack them, so they were all caught unprepared. More than 10 demon clans within 1,000 miles of the two continents' mountain boundary were wiped out in just 3 days. 3,000 kilometers away from here, a huge ship that was 10,000 meters tall was floating above a surging river. Below it, an unknown number of golden carps were leaping and pulling the ship, slowly dragging it forward. The sound of the waves slapping against the water could be heard even from 100 kilometers away. This was the corner tent king boat of the Yuyuan tribe. Usually, the tribe leader Zhu Bogeo rode on this boat to patrol the tribe along the more than 9,000 miles of Jin River. But today he was alone on the cloud raft, staring at the night sky. Although he had cultivated for 800 years, he still looked like a young Taoist. He was tall and straight, with a face like jade. The 2 carp whiskers beside his lips were as white as jade, translucent and translucent. They floated under the moonlight, sprinkling crystal beads and silver stars from time to time. If one looked in a direction, it was as if they could see light flying. The sound of hurried footsteps came from behind. A cultivator who looked like a scholar came up and bowed. He said in a low voice, "Father, there is news from the front. The disciples of the Qinsong school opened a cave abode on Mount Guchui yesterday and set up a restrictive formation. It seems like they will be staying there for a long time." Zhu Bogeo said calmly, "Have you pacified the envoys?" The middle-aged cultivator said, "I've already persuaded them to endure it for now. But this is not a long-term plan. I have lost my sense of propriety. Father, please make a decision." Zhu Bogeo sighed. "What will come will come. It's just that it's a step earlier than I expected. This spiritual master Zhang is indeed not simple. If we had waited for another few decades, the agreement between me and the 6 great demonic sects would have been fulfilled. At that time, our tribe would have had the chance to rise. It's a pity, a pity. Fate is just a step short. In ancient times, demonic cultivators walked the strength path. Ever since the battle between the virtuous cultivators and the demonic cultivators, most of the heavenly demonic bloodlines were severed. Those who came to the top were mostly chi path cultivators from the 8 divisions. Most of the strength path cultivators were still cultivated by the side branches and small tribes. Thus, they all became the subordinates of the 8 divisions. He was very clear that now that the heavenly demons were extinct, wanting to cultivate the strength path to the 5th revolution was just a fool's dream. Only by walking the chi path would they have a chance. But this situation had already existed for several thousand years. It was almost impossible for a small division to rise. But if there was a great change in the world, like the 3 great tribulations, then his tribe would have a chance. Several hundred years ago, an envoy from the demonic sects had come to him. They wanted him to think of a way to go south to restrain Qinsong school during the demonic tribulation. In exchange, they would teach him chi path techniques. At that time, he agreed without even thinking and secretly sent his children to the demonic sections. First, it was to cultivate their techniques, and second, it was to use them as a hostage. But he had never thought that before he could accomplish this important matter, Qinsong school would come knocking on his door. The middle-aged cultivator said in a panic, "Father, could it be that Qinsong school knows about our conspiracy with the demonic sects?" Zhu Bogeo shook his head. "They probably don't know, but I've also sensed something." The middle-aged cultivator said anxiously, "Father, Qinsong school is too powerful. How can our Yu Yuan tribe resist them? Why don't we send a letter and ask the old ancestor to come back?" Halfway through his words, Zhu Bogeo raised his hand to stop him. "Back then, when I led my tribe out of the Carp tribe, I said that I would never speak to the tribe again. How can I ask them for help again? Moreover, Qinsong school has the Dark North Heavenly Sword. Even if the old ancestors of the various tribes come, it will be useless." The middle-aged cultivator was at a loss. He mumbled, "Then what should we do, what should we do?" Zhu Bogeo lowered his head and thought for a long time. Then he said, "I heard that spiritual master Zhang is the #1 among the 18 sects in sword duels. I've long wanted to fight him. Take my message talisman and tell him that I've arranged a battle with him in 3 months. If I win by a fluke, ask him to return to Donghua continent. If I lose, he will decide everything." When the middle-aged cultivator heard that he was about to make a move, he calmed down a little. But then he asked in confusion, "Father, why 3 months later?" The tribes on both sides of the Jin River regarded them as their master. If they did not make a move against Qinsong school, those small tribes would most likely break away when they saw that they could no longer be protected. Zhu Bogeo sneered. "This 3-month deadline is reserved for the devil sect. If they do not do anything, why should my tribe risk our lives for them?" The middle-aged cultivator could not help but come to a realization. Zhu Bogeo continued, "In a few days, bring the disciples of the direct line to the ancestral court. If I lose, don't come back." The middle-aged cultivator nodded silently. He bowed and went to make arrangements. Half a day later, Zhu Bogeo's letter of challenge reached Wei Zihong. The latter did not dare to act on his own and immediately sent a letter to the heavenly lake of bright nether. 3 days later, Zhang Yan received the letter. After reading it, he immediately ordered Jing Yu to summon Luo Xiao. After a while, Luo Xiao arrived. After greeting him, Zhang Yan handed over the letter and said with a smile, "Does fellow Taoist Luo know of this person?" Luo Xiao lightly pinched the letter with her slender fingers. Her eyes wandered as she read the letter. She said, "Zhu tribe is a branch of Carp tribe's Chu tribe. Zhu Bogeo is not a nobody. He had already become a 4th-rank strength path cultivator several hundred years ago." Then she looked over with her beautiful eyes. "Is Master going to accept the challenge?" Zhang Yan said with a smile, "Since this person sent a letter of challenge, how can I not accept it? We can get rid of this person once and for all." Luo Xiao said doubtfully, "Master, forgive me for speaking bluntly. Even if Master exterminates these Yuyuan tribe, It is just a drop in the ocean to the millions of demons in the northern underworld. If they want to come south, even if we can stop them for a while, we won't be able to stop them for long. She was a member of Luo tribe and knew the reason why the demon tribes insisted on coming south. If one wanted to cultivate a strength path technique to the middle 4th rank, they would need a lot of external items. Many spirit herbs were hard to find in the northern underworld continent, but they were extremely easy to obtain in the eastern flower continent. Thus, even if they exterminated these demon tribes, it would only be a few decades of peace. Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Fellow Taoist Luo is right. Therefore, I have other means this time." He said he wanted to conquer the northern underworld, but his main purpose was to prevent these demon cultivators from causing trouble when he fought with the demonic sect cultivators. This needed to be done strategically. Blindly killing would only arouse the other party's hatred and make the situation more dangerous. At that time, it was very likely that he would provoke two enemies, the demonic sect and the demon cultivators. Luo Xiao asked curiously, "Master's plan, how can I know about it?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Luo is a member of Luo tribe, so you should know that among the 8 demon tribes, only the direct descendants can cultivate Qi path techniques. As for those who cultivate strength path, they are seen as lowly slaves." Luo Xiao sighed and said, "Indeed." The ancient 8 divisions were all sky demons, and they were completely different from the current 8 divisions. After the sky demons died out, the latter obtained the Shenmen cultivation method, and only then did they have the chance to make a name for themselves. Because they were afraid of being replaced, they never imparted Qi path cultivation methods. Zhang Yan said playfully, "Could it be that those demon tribes don't want to cultivate Qi path? It's not that they don't want to, they just can't find the way." Luo Xiao nodded her head lightly. Shenmen techniques looked easy to obtain, but if it was not a superior technique, without the guidance of a master, it would be difficult to achieve anything great. Moreover, even if they had the techniques, they would still need to cultivate divine arts to protect themselves and save their lives. Techniques could be obtained, but where could they find divine arts? Even if they managed to cultivate them, they would not be as strong as those of the same generation. At this moment, she could vaguely guess Zhang Yan's plan. "Master, are you planning to make a fuss about that technique?" Zhang Yan smiled and nodded, saying, "Yes, after the matter of Yuyuan tribe is settled, those wild tribes that are hard to tame need to be completely exterminated. Then, we will pick a few obedient tribes and teach them Qi path techniques to their sons and nephews, ordering them to guard the 2 continents' mountain boundary for our Qinsong." Luo Xiao praised, "Master, this is a good plan. This way, these people will be willing to serve you, and Qinsong only needs to send 1 or 2 people to deal with them. We don't need to worry too much, and we can use all our strength in the continent." Chapter 797. P.S. Something came up at home, but it's done. Shuahua sect, Lanxi Terrace. The elder on duty, Li Xiu, was talking to his senior brother, Tan Xing. Suddenly, there was a commotion outside the cave abode. He frowned and asked, "Who's outside?" The boy on duty said, "Master, it's disciple Zhu Min. He said he has something important to discuss with you. I told him that Master is entertaining spiritual Master Qiu and has no time to meet him, but he doesn't believe me." Tan Xingying smiled. "He's my junior brother's disciple after all, why not meet him?" Li Xiu was silent for a moment, then said, "Since he's here, let him in." Not long after he said that, a young cultivator stumbled into the cave and knelt down on the couch. He kowtowed and said with tears in his eyes, "Master, Yutsong sect has come to bully us. Father has no choice but to issue a challenge, but that Taoist Master Zhang is really powerful. Disciple is afraid that Father is not this person's match. Master, please lend us a hand." Li Xiu sighed softly and got down from the bed. He helped him up and comforted him gently. "The sect will not ignore the matter of the demon kings. Your uncle Master Tan and I are discussing this matter. Zhu Min, you don't have to worry. Go back and cultivate well. Your potential is not below that of the same sect. Don't let this matter disturb your state of mind." Zhu Min had thought that this would be a difficult matter, and that her master would most likely try to make excuses, but she didn't expect him to agree so easily. She stared blankly for a while before she came to her senses and said gratefully, "Thank you, master. Thank you, master." Li Xiu smiled kindly and patted his shoulder. "Go." Zhu Min took a few steps back and kowtowed again, saying, "Yu Yuan's millions of troops are counting on master." After he finished speaking, he left. After that, he stood up and left. Tan Xingying turned around and asked, "Junior brother, are you going to save them?" Li Xiu sat back on the bed and said expressionlessly, "Save? The Yudzang sect's move is to clear their path of retreat so that they can deal with us. Zhang Yanjing can't wait for our Ling sect to come to their doorstep, thinking that he can advance. How can we walk right into the trap at this time?" Tan Xingying thought for a moment and said seriously, "If we let the situation deteriorate, our previous arrangements will be in vain." Suddenly, a voice rang out. He said, "It's just a casual move, why do you have to take it so seriously?" When the two of them heard this voice, they immediately got off the bed and bowed, saying respectfully, "Benefactor." In the hall, the bronze crane breathed out a puff of white smoke. Then it spun and condensed. She turned into a high Taoist bun. A Taoist with red eyes, red eyebrows, and skin as smooth as jade said, "Rise, all of you." He waved the horsetail whisk in his hand. He sat down on the main seat. Li Xiu cautiously asked, "Disciple would like to ask teacher, how should we deal with Yu Yuan's troops?" The red-browed Taoist said in a deep voice, "The spirit cave is about to appear, and it's not the time to go against Qinsong school yet. However, Zhu Min is my disciple after all. If we ignore this request of the sect, it will be disappointing." He raised his sleeve and took out a jade box, saying, "This is the remnant of the dragon turtle shell hidden in the pool. You can order him to take it and give it to his father. Then, tell him that if the patriarchs lose this battle, if his nephew is willing to come to our sect, he can be protected. If his origin spirit can escape, he can be a human in his next life and join our blood soul sect. I will accept him as a direct disciple." Li Xiu took it, thought for a moment, and asked carefully, "Who should send these 2 items? Do you want me to go?" The red-browed Taoist said, "No need. Zhu Min is suitable, send him." Li Xiu and Tan Xingying looked at each other and bowed, saying, "Yes, teacher." However, 2 hours later, Zhu Min left the Shueshua sect alone with the letter and the dragon turtle shell. He boarded the flying shuttle given by the sect and went to the northern darkness continent. He rushed all the way, and after half a month he returned to Yu Yuan's tribe. Then, he impatiently handed the 2 items over. When Zhu Bogeo heard about this, he fell into deep thought. He didn't expect the Shueshua sect to send his son back without any intention of forcing him. He couldn't help but sigh deeply, thinking to himself, "I originally planned to give it my all and admit defeat if the situation turns bad. However, the Shueshua sect has spoken so openly, so I have no choice but to go and fight with my life." A figure flashed outside the door, and a middle-aged cultivator walked in. He bowed and said, "Father?" Zhu Bogeo asked, "Did you send your little brother away?" The middle-aged cultivator said, "I have already persuaded him to leave as soon as possible, so the clan elders didn't notice." Zhu Bogeo nodded. This matter of sending his youngest son to the devil sect to cultivate was originally a secret. If the elders of the sect were to see this, there might be a misunderstanding. And at this critical juncture, the clan could not afford to be tossed around. The middle-aged cultivator glanced at the dragon turtle bone armor on the table and sighed. "It is a pity that there is no heavenly demon blood essence, otherwise with this item, Father might be able to step into the 5th transformation realm even if he risked his life to break through." Zhu Bogeo said in a deep voice, "It's better than nothing. With this item, I can at least push my strength path's 4th transformation realm to perfection. I'll have a higher chance of winning against spiritual Master Zhang." He thought for a while and said, "There are still 2 months until the day of the battle. Time is tight, so I need to go into seclusion immediately. I'll leave the clan's matters to you. If the Qinsong disciples come to attack, you can retreat for the time being and ignore them. We'll discuss everything after I come out of seclusion. The middle-aged Taoist bowed and said, I understand. 2 months passed by quickly. Under the pressure of the Qinsong school disciples, Yuan's tribe had no choice but to abandon their defenses on the shore and retreat into the depths of the Jin River. The Qinsong disciples did not let them off easily. They set up a restrictive formation on Shosue Mountain, less than 300 miles away from the Jin River. Wei Zihong's dermic carriage was also moved here from Guchui Mountain, leaving only 100 or so disciples behind to guard it. At this time, Wei Zihong brought a few disciples to the peak of the mountain and looked down at the scenery below. A long-bearded Taoist beside him pointed at the surging river and said, Spiritual Master Wei, please take a look. This is the Jin River, one of the 3 great rivers in the south of the northern Darkstar continent. It said that in ancient times, it was connected to the abyssal waters. Thus, the demon tribes that live here all have the word abyssal in their names. This Taoist's name was Wang Su, and he was a half-human, half-demon. When he was young, he had once worked as a cauldron boy for an alchemist. Relying on his innate intelligence, he had learned quite a few alchemy techniques. After that alchemist died, he came out to walk around, but he didn't expect to be treated as an esteemed guest by many tribes. Thus, he was very familiar with the geography of the mountains, rivers, and various demon tribes. After Yuan tribe showed signs of swallowing the surrounding tribes, he was afraid of being blamed by the 8 tribes. Thus, he used the excuse of traveling far away and built a hut in the mountains. When Zhao Chong came to visit, he met this person by chance. He felt that this person was familiar and very useful, so he introduced him to Wei Zihong. Wei Zihong's gaze swept back and forth over the river. He asked the disciple beside him, Has there been any movement these days? The disciple replied, reporting to Spiritual Master. Yuan tribe has not made a move yet. Wei Zihong said solemnly, Don't be careless. Tomorrow is the day of the battle. Master is about to make his move as well. There can't be any accidents. All of you must be extra careful. The disciple hurriedly acknowledged. Wei Zihong turned and said, Taoist Wang, you once said that Zhu Bogeo has the temperament of an ambitious and ruthless person. Now, he has retreated again and again. In your opinion, is there some kind of crafty scheme? Wang Su bowed slightly and said, Zhu Bogeo's conduct in the past can be considered dignified. He rarely resorts to crafty schemes. In this humble Taoist's opinion, he must be hoping to fight with Spiritual Master Zhang to prevent his tribe from being harmed for no reason. Wei Zihong said, You previously said that Yuan tribe only has a little over 10,000 people. The rest are made up of the Jin River's water tribes. Could this Zhu Bogeo be making a feint? On the surface, he's issuing a letter of challenge, but in the dark, he's fleeing with his own tribe? Wang Su shook his head repeatedly and said, Spiritual Master Wei, that's definitely not the case. Only the wild demons of the Eastern Sea with no foundation would do such a thing. In the North Darkstar continent, all the great demons are the royal generals of the tribe. When they rise to power, they must make an oath with the tribe, stating that they are one. The royal general will receive the support of the tribe, and the tribe will be sheltered under their wings. If the two are separated, neither can survive. That's why every time the demon tribes invade Donghua, they all come with their entire tribe, without exception. Wei Zihong nodded and said, So that's how it is. Wang Su, you contributed a lot to the successful annihilation of hundreds of demon tribes. Once we're done with this Yuan tribe, I'll ask my teacher for credit and get you the title of Jin River's chief supervisor. Hearing this, Wang Su immediately became excited. He hurriedly knelt down and kowtowed, saying, Thank you, Spiritual Master Wei. Thank you, Spiritual Master Wei. The technique he was currently practicing was still the shallow breathing technique that the Taoist had passed down. After opening his meridians, there was no hope for him to make any progress. But with the title of Jin River's chief supervisor, he could be taught Qi Path Xian skills. Not only that, this position could be passed down for generations. In the future, if his nephew was talented, he could even be sent to the Qinsong sect to cultivate. How could he not be overjoyed? Wei Zihong smiled. Just as he was about to let him get up, he suddenly felt something. He turned his head and looked down. He saw that the Jin River seemed to be boiling. The sky was dark and the ground was dark. There was a thick fog everywhere. There was a loud whistling sound that shook the eardrums. The forbidden formation on Hui Mountain was actually formed by talisman. It was like candlelight being blown by the wind, flickering and flickering. Seeing such a change, many of the Qinsong disciples who were out for the first time had a change in expression. Wei Zihong's expression was still calm. He squinted his eyes and a divine eye in the middle of his forehead suddenly opened. A ray of golden light shone out and through the thick fog, he could see a few hundred miles away. On the Jin River, a demonic wind was blowing. There were at least 1 million demonic cultivators gathered in one place. They slowly moved forward with a momentum that could crush mountains and destroy cities. In the middle, there was a huge ship that was pulled by over 100 white-haired water apes. On the ship stood a Taoist with his hands clasped behind his back. He seemed to have noticed that Wei Zihong was looking at him. He turned his head and smiled. With a wave of his sleeve, the scenery was covered again. Wei Zihong closed the divine eye on his forehead and took a step back. His expression was solemn as he thought, these demonic cultivators can actually form a formation with 1 million troops? If it wasn't for the guidance of an expert, it would be impossible. Master is right. If we don't get rid of them soon, they will become a huge threat to our Qinsong. We must get rid of them before we can. He was slightly worried. If 1 million demonic cultivators attacked together, he was confident that he could deal with them. But if they formed a formation, even if he called Han Wanka and the other 2 behind him, they might not be able to stop them. Could it be that he had to abandon this place and retreat back to empty Gusi? Just as he was thinking, a dragon's roar was heard from the clouds. Wei Zihong's expression changed. He looked up and said excitedly, "It's Master." The disciples of Feng Tsang hurriedly looked up and saw a strong wind suddenly swirling in the sky. The dark clouds surrounding the Shonyan mountain immediately opened up a large gap, and the sunlight shone down. A pair of dark flood dragons emerged from the dark clouds with a 3-storied pagoda behind them. Then, they swung their tails and rushed down, dragging a 3-storied pagoda behind them. Thousands of beams of light followed closely behind them, flying down together like rainbows and sprinkling starlight on the ground. Chapter 798. Yuan's tribe had also sensed the commotion on Shosue Mountain. The middle-aged cultivator glanced over, then hurried to the bow of the boat. He bowed and said, "Royal Father, it seems that spiritual Master Zhang has arrived." Zhu Bogeo said in a low voice, "He's come at the right time. Don't worry about him. Pass down my orders. Order the tribe to advance, and not retreat a single step." The middle-aged cultivator said, "I'll pass down the order at once." He turned to the bottom of the boat and waved the formation flags. When the elders on the various formation gates saw this, they also ordered their tribesmen to wave the formation flags in response. The entire formation rumbled forward with the momentum of falling thunder and rolling stones. Zhu Bogeo took a few steps forward and gazed at the double dragon flying carriage in the distant sky. Although he was going to fight with Zhang Yan tomorrow, it didn't mean that he was willing to be forced by the Qinsong school. The formation of 1 million tribes could flatten mountains and cut off rivers wherever it passed. With this kind of pressure, it wasn't impossible to chase the other party out of Shosue Mountain. At this moment, the double dragon carriage descended and stopped on a spacious area in front of the spell altar. After the 2 inky flood dragons touched the ground with their claws, they roared. Clouds surged under their armpits, and the driver of the carriage held on tightly, not allowing them to move again. After a while, they finally calmed down. Then, 1,000 streaks of light descended like rainbows. It was the thousands of disciples behind them. The bamboo curtain in the pagoda was lifted, and Zhang Yan walked out, wearing a magic crown and a black robe. Jing Yu carried a jade scepter and followed by his side. Wei Zihong hurried forward and bowed, saying, "Disciple respectfully greets teacher." The hundreds of Qinsong disciples below bowed in unison, saying, "Welcome, spiritual Master Zhang." Zhang Yan waved his sleeve, indicating for them to dispense with the formalities. Then he turned and went up the spell altar. Wei Zihong also hurried to follow. Just now they had arrived at the altar. 3 streaks of light flew over from the south in the sky. It was Han Wanka, Kai Rongju, and Peng Yuzhou who saw him coming toward Shosue Mountain. They had also come out of Guchui Mountain and arrived here. After the 3 of them landed, they came up to greet Zhang Yan, and after exchanging greetings, they each sat down. This place was higher than the mountains, allowing one to see everything in one glance. Han Wanka saw the demonic wind in front of him, causing sand and stones to fly everywhere. He said, "I didn't think that this person would actually form a formation to fight against the enemy." Peng Yuzhou sneered. He said, "The demon cultivators of the North Darkstar continent are no longer the sky demons of the ancient times. Only the 8 divisions have some skill. The rest of the cultivators of the strength path don't understand words and theories. Don't talk about controlling this formation. This time, there must be a demon sect cultivator instructing them." Kai Rongju shook his head and said, "Shirji is being biased. This Zhu family is originally from the Chu family of Carp tribe. It's not strange for him to learn a few formations. Although I suspect that he's colluding with the devil sect, I can't make a conclusion based on this." Peng Yuzhou didn't agree and said, "Marshal Uncle Kai's words, I beg to differ." It was obvious that he had not practiced to the slightest degree of subtlety, and some parts were still very rusty. It was obvious that he had set it up in a hurry. If he had obtained the formation diagram earlier, he would have been very familiar with it. How could it be as crude as it is now? Han Wanka said in a low voice, "No matter what, 1,000,000 demons cannot be underestimated. Junior brother Zhang, can Marshal Nephew Wei's previous formation block it? Do you need our help?" Zhang Yan looked forward and smiled. 1,000,000 demons forming a formation. That's a lot of effort. It's obvious that they want to see how I break it. He changed his mind and shook his hand. A golden light flew down and entered Wei Zihong's arms. He said, "Zihong, take this diagram of mine and control the formation. Then, pick 100 core formation disciples and follow the formation diagram method I taught you." Wei Zihong bowed and said, "Disciple obeys." A moment later, the atmosphere of the formation on Shosue Mountain suddenly changed. 100 or so beams of spiritual light rose up like pillars. When they reached the sky, each of them released a bright flame. Like snow melting under the scorching sun, the haze around the mountain was dispelled. Zhu Bogeo saw the change, but his expression did not change. He said to his clansmen, "Without my order, do not stop. Those who disobey will be executed." Under his command, the formation remained unchanged and continued to roll forward. While swords were drawn and bows were drawn, a strange flying shuttle came from the sky. It came close but did not dare to get too close. With a nimble turn, it hid behind a small hill. A cultivator with a strange appearance poked his head out from the shuttle and looked down. He said in surprise, "How strange. Since the Yuan tribe can form a formation to face the enemy, why don't they fight with their lives on the line? Instead, they take the initiative to challenge Zhang Yan. Aren't they sacrificing their strengths for their weaknesses?" The skinny Taoist beside him said, "Junior apprentice brother, you don't understand the logic behind this. Don't look at the millions of Yuan tribe, but most of them have only just gained spiritual intelligence. Only 1 or 2 out of 10 of them can take human form. These people are still beasts. If they don't eat for a day, their stomachs will be unbearably hungry. Although their momentum is difficult to resist, they won't last long. Even if we ignore them, they will disperse in 2 or 3 days at most." The cultivator with the strange appearance suddenly said, "No wonder people say that this is nothing more than an idle chess piece. It is indeed of little use. However, if I'm not wrong, this formation is moving by borrowing the power of the water. It seems slow but is actually fast. It is at most half a day's journey from Shosue Mountain. Once the battle breaks out, even if Zhang Yan is there, the mountain will most likely not be able to defend." The skinny Taoist stroked his beard and said, I think Zhu Bogeo deliberately abandoned the land on the shore to lure the Qinsong over. Then, he formed a formation to suppress them. If Zhang Yan is forced to retreat this time, it will be a great loss of face. The cultivator with the strange appearance grew excited and said, if Zhu Bogeo can really do it, then I will have to look at him in a different light. The skinny Taoist chuckled and said, let's see how Qinsong School responds. Zhu Bogeo watched as the formation closed in on his opponent. He couldn't help but grip the railing of the boat tightly. If he could really force Qinsong School to retreat today and wipe out Zhang Yan's face, even if he lost the battle tomorrow, he would still be able to explain himself to the devil doctrine. At this moment, the sound of footsteps came from below. An old clan elder came up from below and stood firmly on the cabin board. He bowed to him and said solemnly, Your Majesty, you can't go any further. Zhu Bogeo pointed to the front and said, Elder He, you might be able to tell that the formation on the opposite mountain is absolutely unable to stop my tribe. If we work hard today, we will definitely be able to chase Qinsong School back to Mount Gushen. Elder He retorted coldly, So what? Even if we succeed, it will only make Qinsong School even angrier. We won't be able to save our millions of tribesmen. My king might as well rest and recuperate to deal with the battle tomorrow. Zhu Bogeo was stunned. He couldn't tell him his true reason, so he could only say, Elder He, have you ever thought that if I am unfortunately defeated tomorrow and Qinsong School wants to slaughter my tribe, would you all stretch out your necks and wait to be executed? Elder He was startled and said, Of course not. Zhu Bogeo's eyes flickered and he said, Then what I'm doing today is to let them see that my Yuyuan tribe isn't powerless to retaliate. If they push us too far, at worst, we'll just fight to the death. Elder He hesitated for a moment before he reluctantly said, Then let's just say that my king is right. Under Zhu Bogeo's forceful push, the formation was soon 30 miles away from Shonyan Mountain. This was already within the defensive range of the Forbidden Formation. Spiritual vigor was immediately activated, and lofty mountains vaguely appeared in the sky. All of them flew up into the sky and scattered in the blue sky. Then, with a tremor, they all fell down one after another. The demons were instantly thrown into a panic, and they actually showed signs of collapsing. Although this formation was often practiced, it was still a difficult task to gather millions of people together. Moreover, ever since he mastered it, he had never faced anyone. Hence, when he was pressured by this imposing aura, he couldn't hold on for more than 100 years. Seeing that the situation wasn't right, Zhu Bogeo hurriedly shouted and picked up a formation flag. He waved it in the air, and in an instant, a jet of black light rushed out from the formation and collided with one of the mountains, instantly dispersing it. Then he waved the flag again and again, dispersing the falling mountains one by one. Some of them slipped through the net and crashed onto the formation, but they didn't harm the people in the formation. Zhu Bogeo saw that the demons below had calmed down a little, so he said to the disciples beside him, Send a message to all the elders. If we retreat now, the formation will definitely collapse. When that happens, if Qinsong School attacks, although we can escape, our tribe will not be able to survive. Tell them to restrain their tribesmen and work together as one to uproot the formation in front of us and chase the disciples of Qinsong School back. At this moment, the two waves of qi were clashing with each other, as if thunder was piercing through the walls of the heavens. The 20 or so elders of Yuyuan tribe were originally filled with doubt and fear, cowering in fear. But now that they saw that their own formation was rolling forward while the other formation was being forced back, they couldn't help but feel excited and put in even more effort. As the two sides got closer, the clash of qi became even more intense. Spiritual light flew everywhere, causing the heaven and earth to shake and the mountains to shake. The two demonic cultivators on top also felt the flying shuttles under their feet tremble, as if they were about to be swept away. They hurriedly waved their talismans and retreated far away. Wei Zihong couldn't help but stand up and go to the cliff. He opened the divine eye on his forehead and looked for a while, saying, Master, Yuan tribe is already 10 miles away. Zhang Yan only said indifferently, Got it? Han Wangka and Kai Rongju's expressions were solemn. If they were to face that kind of formation head-on later, they might be able to escape by relying on their profound cultivation, but the disciples below them definitely wouldn't be able to survive. Even Peng Yuzhou revealed a bewildered expression. Although he didn't care about the lives of those disciples, he couldn't figure out why Zhang Yan didn't retreat even though he knew he couldn't win. If he was careless and got trapped in the opponent's qi, it would be the end of everything. After a while, Wei Zihong turned around and said, "Master, the demons are already 5 miles away." Zhang Yan nodded, still sitting there without moving. Zhu Bogeo stared fixedly in front of him. If the other party wanted to retreat, this would be their only chance. However, after watching for a while, he saw that there was no movement from Qinsong School, as if they were going to defend to the end. He was shocked at first, but then a look of joy appeared on his face, and he couldn't help but take a few steps forward. He didn't expect the situation to develop to this point. This kind of formation wasn't something that could be stopped by a single person. If he could break through the opponent's formation in one fell swoop and collapse the Shosue Mountain, the qi of the formation that spread for 100 miles would be enough to keep more than half of the demons on the other side. At that time, he would have the capital to bargain with Qinsong School. He suppressed his excitement and calmed his breathing, thinking about whether this was a trap left by Zhang Yan. However, the arrow was already knocked on the bow, and there was no time to think. He waved the formation flag in his hand, and the water of the Jin River suddenly rose, gushing out of the river and covering the land with a loud rumble. Supported by the water, the formation's spiritual vigor circulated, and the qi of the formation that spread for 100 miles would be enough to keep most of the demons on the other side. At that time, he would have the capital to bargain with Qinsong School. Chapter 799. P.S. I only returned home because I had something to do. Let's wait until tomorrow for the next update. Just as the formation was about to crash into them, Han Wanka, Kai Rongju, and Peng Yuzhou's expressions changed. They stood up abruptly. Astral winds rose, and magical treasures flew out from the astral clouds. Wisps of spiritual light descended and protected their bodies. The 2 devil sect cultivators on the shuttle also stared at this place without blinking. They didn't believe that Zhang Yan would put himself in danger, so they were guessing what kind of method he would use to block this earth-shattering collision. A bright light suddenly flashed in Zhang Yan's eyes. He pointed his finger downwards, and a yellow light flashed. In an instant, the mountain beneath his feet was turned into steel. Then, a beam of light shot up into the sky. With a shout, he grabbed downwards, spreading his magic power and spiritual energy. With a light push, the entire Shonyan mountain was forcefully uprooted. The formation below was originally surging forward like a flood, but when the Shonyan mountain was uprooted, it missed. Zhu Bogeo had thought of many ways to deal with it, but he never expected that Zhang Yan would use such a method to neutralize the attack. He was instantly caught unprepared. Looking up, he saw a black-robed Taoist standing in midair with his sleeves fluttering. Astral winds danced around him, lifting a mountain into the sky. His expression was still calm and composed. He stared blankly, momentarily forgetting to give an order. Han Wanka and the other 2 were also shocked. They saw very clearly that Zhang Yan didn't use any divine abilities during the process. He only used his magic power to lift a mountain. Han Wanka couldn't help but sigh. I heard that during junior brother Zhang's alchemy discussion, you once pulled the 9 whales. In terms of the density of your magic power, no one in the same generation can compare to you. Today, I've seen it for myself. As for the demon clan's elders, they were shocked by this scene. Although Yuyuan tribe had 1,000,000 people, it was actually made up of hundreds of tribes of various sizes. Suddenly losing their target, some of the tribes were unwilling to give up and continued to press forward. However, most of them had blank expressions on their faces and stopped moving forward. The originally orderly formation was instantly thrown into disarray. Wei Zihong was the first to calm down. Seeing that the formation at the foot of the mountain was already out of shape, a thought flashed through his mind. Knowing that his opportunity had come, he picked up the formation flag and waved it. In an instant, the formation chi in the mountain turned into a vast and mighty stream. It drained downwards. The 100 core transformation realm disciples who were already in position saw him make his move. He also woke up, immediately activating the formation energy, forming countless flashes of lightning. Then, it slashed downwards. Zhu Bogeo heard the rumbling in the sky, and his expression immediately tensed up. He reacted and hurriedly waved the formation flags, wanting to block it. However, once the formation was messed up, it was not something that could be put back together in a hurry. At this moment, the formation chi that was sucked in was less than 30% of what it was before. It could only block the attacks that came from the sky for a moment before it ran out of strength. As the demon generals had to defend against the torrential waves, they were unable to free themselves for the time being. The bolts of lightning struck the demons without any cover. Under the dusky sky, there seemed to be dozens of lightning snakes wriggling on the ground, illuminating the world. Then, they suddenly faded and returned to silence. After a few breaths, the heaven-shaking roar resounded in all directions. Under this attack, tens of thousands of demons were turned into flying ash. The entire formation could not withstand it any longer, and collapsed with a loud bang. The million demons fled towards the Jin River amidst their screams and howls. However, there were still dozens of small formations in the midst of this fleeing tide. They were like reefs in the sea, standing tall without collapsing. The tens of thousands of relatives of Yuyuan tribe were among them. Under the orders of the tribe elders, they even formed a small formation to resist the lightning of Tianshan Mountain. Zhu Bogeo looked at the tribe members around him, and saw that they all had expressions of fear and confusion on their faces. He knew that the situation was hopeless. After taking a few breaths, a deep sense of exhaustion appeared on his face. He waved his hand and said, "Retreat." When Han Wonka saw this, he leaped up into the sky and pointed to the ground. He said, "Junior apprentice brother, you can order your disciples to go and wipe out these million demons." Many disciples of the Qinsong school looked over. These demon cultivators were like fish on a chopping board. As long as they attacked, it would be their own merit. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Senior apprentice brother, don't be in a hurry to attack. The disciples I brought this time have not been cultivating for long, and they lack experience. This is a good opportunity to polish themselves." Han Wonka thought for a moment, guessing that Zhang Yan might have other considerations. He nodded and said, "Very well, then we will protect you from the side." Zhang Yan first retracted his transcendence energy and returned the Shouyan mountain to the surface. He then looked down and said, "Zihong, lead the disciples to pursue the Zhu family. You can deal with the followers as you see fit. If they don't resist, you can let them go." Han Wonka smiled and said, "Junior apprentice brother's plan is brilliant." However, the Zhu family's formation is still intact, and it won't be easy to break. We might as well make it look like we're driving them away and force Zhu Bogeo to come and rescue them. That way, we can break the formation. Zhang Yan nodded and smiled. "Very well." Wei Zihong bowed and said, "This disciple will obey your orders." Having said that, he left the altar and led 1,000 disciples to pursue the Zhu family. After leaving the Shouyan mountain, he took out a jet-black dragon horn from his sleeve and tossed it into the air. Then, he made a hand seal and immediately, a whistling sound was heard. In an instant, it spread to the surroundings. Any demon cultivator who heard this sound would feel their muscles and bones go limp, and they would fall to the ground. If no one from the Zhu family came to their rescue, they could only be slaughtered by the Qinsong disciples. At this time, from the small formations that had yet to disperse, turbid mists suddenly rushed out. After the mists dispersed, 5 demon generals that were dozens of feet tall appeared. They were all wearing armor and wielding divine weapons. Thunderous roars came from their mouths, and some of the Qinsong disciples with weaker cultivation felt dizzy and fell from the sky. Han Wonka frowned. With a flick of his sleeve, he released a gust of astral wind that swept those disciples back. Peng Yuzhou laughed mockingly and took a step forward. He turned into a ray of light and flew to the front of one of the demon generals. With a flick of his sleeve, The demon general's body was burned to ashes before he could even make a sound. Then, without looking back, Pring Yuzhou flew to the next person. He did the same thing, and in just a few breaths, he had killed all the people who had appeared. Most of these demon generals were the leaders of their clans. After their deaths, the formation under their feet immediately fell apart. At this moment, only a few of the clans were still able to maintain the formation. Seeing this scene, they were also terrified and uneasy. If it weren't for the kings of their clans suppressing them with all their might, they would have fled long ago. When they saw that the situation was not right, they sent messengers to Yuan's tribe to ask for help. Zhu Bogeo saw that although the Qinsong school was aggressive, they did not actually deal a heavy blow to the demon tribes. Instead, they faintly showed signs of surrounding their own area. How could he not guess their intentions? If he led his clansmen forward to rescue them, then the formation would not be able to be maintained and the entire clan would be buried here. Thus, no matter who came to ask for help, he refused them all. He even instructed his subordinates, "Instruct the clan elders to restrain the troops. They are not to attack without permission. Follow my formation flag and retreat back to the Jin River." The middle-aged cultivator rushed to the bow of the boat and tugged at his sleeve, begging, "Father, why don't you challenge Sage Zhang to a battle? Perhaps this crisis can be resolved." Zhu Bogeo flung his hand away and coldly said, "That's just wishful thinking. Tomorrow is the day of the battle. If I go up and challenge him now, do you think Zhang Yan will fight me one-on-one? Just now, haven't you seen that there's a third-stage cultivator in the formation? If the two of them come together, it's still a small matter if I die here, but my subordinates will definitely not be able to survive. Hurry up and back down." The middle-aged cultivator pleaded, "Then are we just going to abandon our clansmen?" Zhu Bogeo snorted and no longer paid him any attention. The middle-aged cultivator lowered his head and thought for a moment. Then he lifted his head and said bitterly, "If father doesn't make a move, the clansmen's morale will definitely fall apart. Although I'm useless, I'm still father's eldest son. If I die here, at least I can answer to the clansmen." Zhu Bogeo was shocked. "You." The middle-aged cultivator took a few steps back and knelt down to kowtow heavily. He turned around and called out to his clan, then took the initiative to greet the Qinsong disciples. Zhu Bogeo looked at his departing figure. He wanted to stop him, but the words were already at the tip of his tongue. He sighed inwardly. At this moment, he could no longer care about anything else. He could only try his best to protect his clansmen as they slowly retreated. Seeing that Zhu Bogeo was not fooled, Wei Zihong decided to change his strategy. He no longer cared about the rest of the clansmen. He summoned his disciples and had them follow behind the Yuan clan. Then he raised the dragon horn into the air and let out a whistling sound. Even with the formation's obstruction, every time the horn sounded, many of the weaker disciples would fall. Although they did not lose their lives, the formation was showing signs of falling apart. Seeing that the situation was not good, Zhu Bogeo looked behind him. Seeing that there were still more than 200 li left, he gritted his teeth and took out a long piece of silk from his sleeve. With a wave of his hand, it spread out like a rainbow. Regardless of how many people it wrapped around, he cast a spell and turned into light that shot into the Jin River. On a flying shuttle in the distance, the skinny Taoist looked at the Qinsong disciples who were still circling above the Jin River. He shook his head and said, "The Yuan clan has suffered such heavy losses. Even if they escape this time, they won't amount to much." The cultivator with the strange appearance said, "It's because they are not familiar with the formation. Otherwise, they would not have revealed such a flaw." The skinny Taoist said, "They are only demons after all. Although there are millions of them, only a few have developed spiritual intelligence. It's already good enough that they can form a formation. What else can we expect from them?" The cultivator with the strange appearance nodded and said, "We'll see tomorrow." The two of them came not only to see the outcome of the battle, but also to spy on Zhang Yan's methods so that they could report back to their sections. As for the survival of the Yuan clan, it had nothing to do with them. Zhu Bogeo returned to the underwater cave and counted the number of his clansmen. He found that there were less than half of them left from the original 10,000. He then ordered someone to find out the whereabouts of his eldest son, but the news he received made him sad. At this moment, Elder He entered the cave and saw the expression on his face. He said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, I didn't expect that Zhang Yan to have such methods. It's not your fault that we lost today. If you can defeat that Zhenren Zhang tomorrow, our clan will still have a chance to survive. I hope you take care of yourself." Zhu Bogeo was silent for a while. He forced himself to pull himself together and stood up. He said in a low voice, "Don't worry, Elder He. I, Zhu Bogeo, can also move mountains. It's nothing. I won't lose my courage because of this. I just feel sorry for the deaths of my clansmen." Elder He said expressionlessly, "That's good. I'll go and pacify the various clansmen. I won't dismiss them. Your Majesty can prepare for the battle with peace of mind. Don't let your clansmen down. I know that your Majesty has always been ambitious. As long as we survive today, it won't be impossible for you to make the great leap." Chapter 800. When Zhu Bogeo heard this, he looked over in surprise. "If I don't save them, are they willing to come under my division?" Old He said, "Your Majesty is wise to sacrifice a son. All the divisions are grateful and haven't dispersed yet." Zhu Bogeo sighed, but didn't offer any explanation. In reality, he also understood that the divisions didn't disperse because they were afraid of being easily intercepted and killed by the Qinsong disciples after they left. Thus, they chose to stay here and wait for the results of the battle tomorrow. The death of his eldest son just happened to give them an excuse. He thought about it and said, "How many divisions are left?" Old He said with an indifferent expression, "Fortunately, the Jin River is only about 300 miles away from the Shosue Mountain. 70% of the tribe escaped, but your Majesty doesn't need to worry about them. As long as the kings and elders are still here, there is no need to worry about not being able to gather the troops." When Zhu Bogeo saw that the situation was not as bad as he had imagined, his face regained some of its vigor. He cupped his hands and said, "Elder, he is worthy of being the stabilizing force of our tribe. If it weren't for you, the tribe would have fallen into chaos." Old He said calmly, "We are all of the same tribe. Why are you treating me like an outsider? Your Majesty has expended a lot of energy in today's battle. Please rest well. I will take my leave now." With that, he cupped his hands and slowly walked out of the cave. Zhu Bogeo looked at his back and felt that this elder was different from before. There seemed to be a deeper meaning hidden in his words. He then shook his head. There was no time to think about this. He needed to think about how to fight against Zhang Yan tomorrow. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about how to deal with him before. He saw that Zhang Yan's magic power was thick and stronger than he had imagined. Although he had just now boasted that he could do the same, he wouldn't be able to do it so easily if he didn't transform into 100 feet tall. He thought for a moment, then raised his hand and closed the door. Then, he took out a letter from his sleeve and opened it to read it carefully. This was given to him by the Shueshua sect. It recorded the many techniques that Zhang Yan had displayed during the sword battle of the 18 sections. But to his regret. However, the most crucial part of the Star Stone battle was not recorded in the book. That was what it said. From Zhang Yan's point of view, not including his flying sword technique, he would at least have 3 divine powers, namely the purple heaven godly thunder, the minor universe shifting art, and the yellow dragon capturing palm. But this was only 100 years ago. As for what happened today, but there was no way to spy on it. As for the heaven and earth sealing technique, Zhu Bogeo did not think too much about it. Strength path cultivators were not proficient in the art of escape. However, because he possessed the Weili, he was able to easily escape. On the other hand, he wasn't afraid of being captured. Moreover, his cultivation level was similar to the other parties, so he should be able to break free easily. What he worried about was that since Zhang Yan was able to take first place in the sword battle, he should have no shortcomings in his Dao techniques. Even if there were flaws, it would not be something he could easily find. The only thing he could win against the other party was that he did not know about his own background. He thought to himself, It seems that the longer the battle drags on, the more disadvantageous it is for me. If Zhang Yan finds out about my techniques, then it will be a dead end for me. However, it is impossible to kill Zhang Yan in a short period of time. After thinking about it deeply, he felt that there was a way to solve this problem. He reached into his sleeve and felt around for a while, feeling a little more confident. After making up his mind, he cast aside everything and sat down cross-legged, breathing in and out spiritual qi. After he recovered, he could fight Zhang Yan with all his strength the next day. On Shosue Mountain, Wei Zihong stepped onto the spell altar and bowed. Master, thanks to the protection of Jinren Han, none of our disciples have died. Zhang Yan asked, Zihong, what do you think of these disciples? Wei Zihong was startled. After thinking for a while, he said, just as Master said, this generation still lacks experience. However, from what I can see, the disciples of the aristocratic families are fine, but there are some brave and determined people under Master and disciple. However, because their techniques are not good, it is difficult for them to display their strengths. If they can receive a good inheritance, they may be able to achieve great things in the future. Zhang Yan nodded. The great waves wash away the sand, he said. This is how master and disciple teach disciples. However, there are 3 great tribulations within 1,000 years. Unless one is a Jinren of the heavenly abode, it is difficult for anyone to determine whether they will live or die. There is no need to be too rigid. If you see a talent that can be nurtured, you may as well give them some pointers. Wei Zihong nodded. Just as he was about to leave, he hesitated and said, Today, when I observed the movements of Yuan's tribe, I seemed to have sensed a wisp of demonic aura. However, I didn't split my attention to observe it at the time. My guess is that there might be a cultivator of the devil sect hiding nearby, spying on us. Zhang Yan was not surprised at all. He smiled and said, The appearance of the demonic cave is not far away. The people of the devil sect must be very eager to know what I'm capable of. The news of my battle with Zhu Bogeo should have spread long ago. It would be strange if they didn't come. Wei Zihong said, But tomorrow, disciple? Zhang Yan waved his hand and said with a smile, Since they have come here, they should be fully prepared. There is no need to waste energy. If they have the ability to watch tomorrow's battle, feel free to watch. Wei Zihong heard this and knew that his master had a way to deal with it, so he excused himself. The night passed quickly. On the second day, Zhu Bogeo left his clansmen in the Jin River and brought only a dozen or so attendants with him. He drove a small boat ashore and stopped in front of Shosue Mountain. Jinren Zhang, he said, I have come to keep my promise. Zhang Yan saw him and exchanged a few words with Wei Zihong. Then, under everyone's gaze, he rode the astral wind into the sky. He cupped his hands and said, Greetings, monster kings. Zhu Bogeo returned the greeting. Then he gave Zhang Yan a few serious looks. Suddenly he sighed and said, In yesterday's battle, I originally wanted to be able to suppress you, Jinren. However, I didn't expect that I would overestimate my own abilities and invite humiliation upon myself. If I lose to you today, I hope that you won't completely exterminate me. Zhang Yan laughed and said, Spiritual master, there is no need to belittle yourself. To be able to gather 1,000,000 tribe members in the northern Dark Continent, you are already not inferior to the 8 major tribes. How would I dare to look down on you? Zhu Bogeo's eyes flickered. He laughed and said, Spiritual Master Zhang, since I issued this challenge, you should choose the location of the battle. Zhang Yan didn't decline. He thought for a moment and said, If that's the case, how about going to the extreme heaven? Zhu Bogeo's eyelids twitched. He said, Very well, very well. That suits me perfectly. Spiritual Master Zhang, please go first. Zhang Yan smiled and shook his shoulder lightly. He turned into a gust of wind and flew up. Zhu Bogeo stirred up astral winds as he followed along. Han Wonka looked up and stopped Kai and Peng, who were about to fly up into the sky. He said, The extreme heaven is not like other places. If we go up there, we will be suspected of bullying the few with numbers. Let's not watch the battle, let's just wait here. The 2 demon sect disciples in the distance were stunned when they saw this scene. The area above the extreme heaven was not like the surface of the earth. There was nothing in the surroundings. With Zhang Yan's ability, if the two of them followed him, they would be discovered immediately. The strange-looking cultivator said in a low voice, "Senior brother, what should we do?" The skinny Taoist said hesitantly, "There's still a bottle of yang cleansing water. It shouldn't be a problem to cover our tracks for 2 hours." The strange-looking cultivator said with some heartache, "This water was given to us by our master to save our lives in times of crisis." The skinny Taoist thought carefully and said, "As long as we can see through Zhang Yan's methods, it will be a great merit. When the time comes, it won't be difficult to ask for it again, right? Besides, we have the shuttle under our feet. If we get a bit further away, we can escape even if we're discovered. What is there to be afraid of?" The two discussed and decided to take the risk. Thus, they retreated far away. When they were 100 miles away, they sprinkled the yang cleansing water on the shuttle and themselves. Instantly, their figures became faintly discernible. Even their auras became extremely weak. If outsiders didn't get close, they wouldn't be able to detect them. When they felt that it was appropriate, the two leapt onto the flying shuttle and flew into the sky. At the same time, Zhang Yan and Zhu Bogeo had already broken through the strong clouds one after the other and arrived above the extreme sky. As soon as they entered, Zhu Bogeo suddenly flung out his sleeve. With a whoosh, a gust of strong wind was produced. When Zhang Yan saw this, his expression didn't change. He also lightly shook his sleeve, and the two collided. They each borrowed the momentum to retreat 100 meters away. They each stood in a different spot, facing each other from afar. Zhu Bogeo's expression turned solemn. He raised his hand, and a cloud of black smoke emerged behind him. When it dispersed, several hundred gilded beryllium leaping fish could be seen floating in the sky. However, there was no handle at the bottom, only a beryllium blade. Under the scorching sun, they all emitted a dazzling golden light. Zhang Yan looked over and immediately saw through them. He said with slight surprise, "I didn't expect fellow Taoist Zhu to be proficient in formations?" Zhu Bogeo looked over and said, "I only have a rough understanding. I wouldn't dare to say I'm proficient in formations, but I don't dare to be careless when dealing with spiritual Master Zhang. I hope you won't say I'm playing tricks." Zhang Yan smiled slightly and said, "You and I can be considered to be fighting to the death. We can use any ability we have." Zhu Bogeo's formation wasn't actually used to trap Zhang Yan. He understood very well that with his own ability to control formations, it would be useless against someone who was proficient in escape techniques. Thus, he was merely using it to conceal himself. What he was thinking was that if he couldn't win, he would hide inside the formation. That way, he would be able to win a moment of respite. Once he recovered his strength, he would come out and fight again. Even if that didn't work out, he could still maintain a stalemate. As long as he was in an invincible position, he could slowly search for his opponent's flaws. He stood in front of the formation without moving. He fished out a large bow from his sleeve and spread his legs. With a he, he lowered his body and pulled the bowstring to a full crescent. He aimed at Zhang Yan, and in the span of a breath, he loosened his fingers. With a whoosh, a streak of golden light shot out like a rainbow. Halfway through, the streak of light suddenly split into two. After traveling a short distance, it split into 4, and by the second half, there were already 8 streaks of light. Cultivators who cultivated the path of strength could only display their abilities in close combat. This was because they were truly lacking when it came to escape techniques. Thus, those who cultivated this path would usually find a treasured bow in hand. This way, when they fought, they could force their opponent to come up and fight. This bow of his was called the Thousand-Eye Bewildering Shadow Bow. The arrows were condensed from the spiritual chi on the bow. Although they weren't very powerful, they could track the enemy's tracks and create illusions, making it difficult to distinguish between the real and the fake. When Zhang Yan saw the streak of light coming over, he smiled faintly. He didn't summon any treasures. He just waved his sleeve, and a vast gust of wind blew past, pushing the arrow to the side. Without waiting for his opponent to draw his bow again, he lightly stomped his feet, and a dense fog suddenly spread out around him. In but a moment, his figure disappeared in the boundless fog. Floating astronomy. Chapter 801. The surrounding fog rose, and Zhu Bogeo immediately lost track of Zhang Yan. However, he seemed to have predicted this, and his expression did not change. He took a few steps back, getting closer to the formation door. He was prepared to retreat into it at any time if something went wrong. Inside his body, his mysterious technique circulated, and a scarlet light shot out from his eyes. It shot out 300 meters, sweeping across the sky in an attempt to see through the fog. After looking for a while, he still could not find the source. Suddenly, he sensed something and glanced sideways. He saw 100 or so ink-colored water droplets flying over from the fog. Just now was the beginning of the fight, and he did not want to expose his methods too early. With a thought, he raised his forearm to block in front of him. However, this object seemed to be only a tiny water droplet, yet it carried a tremendous force. Bang, 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 bang. He felt his arm shake violently, and his body was pushed by the great force to the point of swaying repeatedly, causing him to be unable to stand firmly. He was a demon lord, after all. How could he be willing to be forced back right from the start? With a loud roar, he advanced instead of retreating. After taking 2 steps forward, he suddenly swung his arm forcefully, flinging away the dozens of serene heavy water droplets. Zhang Yan's gaze flickered when he saw this scene from within the fog. If it had been an ordinary demon king, these 100 or so serene heavy water droplets would not have been able to harm them, and they would not have been able to deal with it so easily. From this, it could be seen that Zhu Bogeo had already cultivated to the 4th transformation of Strength Path. Such a great demon had a sturdy body and did not fear the heaven and earth sealing technique. He also had a formation behind him, so he could not take him down in a short amount of time. In that case, there was no harm in using a small technique to probe him first. After he had a clear understanding of his movements, he would decide how to act. After making up his mind, he circulated his magic power. Another 100 or so ink-black water droplets appeared in the air, and he waved his sleeve lightly. It sprinkled over like rain. Just now, Zhu Bogeo had tested it once and found that this thing was only strong and heavy, but did not pose much of a threat to him. Thus, he did not dodge or evade. With a low roar, layers of fine scales appeared under his robes, spreading to his cheeks. They shone with a golden light. It was as if a layer of golden armor had covered him. At the same time, he lowered his head slightly, preparing to endure it. But he didn't know that it wasn't the nether heavy water that came this time, but the nether heavy water instead, and when he noticed something was off, it was already too late. His body felt as if it had been smashed by 100 hammers at the same time. His scales shattered, and he staggered backward. At this moment, he caught a glimpse of another 100 or so drops of ink beads flying towards him. He cursed inwardly. With a wave of his hand, a long silk cloth floated in front of him. Its color was like a golden sunset. It swayed in the air like water ripples, and with a light tremble, it absorbed all of the heavy water that was flying toward it. He was not a lowly little demon. He had millions of people under him and was extremely wealthy. He did not lack any magical treasures or magical powers. This golden carp crouching ripple silk was refined from the blood essence of the golden carp clan leaders of the past generations. It was originally refined to deal with the divine abilities and magic treasures of the disciples of the celestial sect of wonders. Even if a huge wave were to come crashing down, it would still be easily absorbed. Zhang Yan saw this, but his expression did not change. Although the heavy water had been absorbed, he was able to force the other party to reveal the powerful magical treasures in his hands. It could be said that he had achieved his goal of attacking. He remembered that the other party had used a long silk cloth yesterday, but it was red in color, which was quite different from this one. Obviously, one could be used to escape, and the other could be used to collect things. He guessed that the other party should have an even more powerful magical treasure on him, and decided to test it a few more times. So he waved his sleeve, and shot over 10 drops of heavy water over to restrain the other party. He himself soared to a high altitude and gathered his magical power. Behind him, rolling yellow smoke condensed and gathered. Du Bogeo held the golden silk cloth in his hand, and with a light shake he collected the attacking heavy water again. Just as he was about to find Zhang Yan's location in the mist, he suddenly heard a muffled sound in the air. He sensed that it was getting closer and closer to where he was. Not long after, he saw the mist above his head break apart, and then a huge hand that covered the sky and the earth slapped down. His expression changed, and he reached out to touch his abdomen. He raised his head and opened his mouth. With he spat out a white pearl. It rolled in the air and released a dazzling light. It was like melting ice and snow, and it corroded a big hole in the big hand. With a rumble, the big hand fell, and the Gang Yun within dozens of miles exploded. The Gang Ing above the extreme heaven had no obstruction, and they all fell down. In the Shosue mountain below, after hearing a deafening sound, the Qinsong disciples saw the clouds in the sky split, and cracks appeared like broken tiles. Among them, there were neon golden lights darting back and forth, like thunder and lightning flashing in the dark clouds. After a few glances, Wei Zihong took a few steps forward, waved the formation flag, and activated the formation in the mountain. After the Gang Ing fell, it hit on the formation, and like a hail rain, it immediately made a concentrated sound, and the formation's spiritual vigor fluctuated, flickering and flickering. The demons hiding in the Jin River, on the other hand, were in trouble. After the Gang Ing fell into the water, it floated with the water. This thing was harder than metal, but it was as fine as dust. When it fell, it was mixed with yang poison qi, and those with low cultivation were immediately injured by it. Blood flowed, and there were wails everywhere. Only then did the demon tribes know that it was not safe to hide in the water, and they hurriedly activated the formation to protect themselves. After a while, the situation was stabilized. At the same time, the two cultivators from the demon sect had already arrived above the sky on the flying shuttle, but because of the fog, it was difficult to see the situation clearly. The cultivator was about to use the candle illuminating the 9 underworlds to take a look, but before he could move, he was stopped by the skinny Taoist, who said, "Junior apprentice brother, our cultivation is not as good as Zhang Yan's. If we use this rashly, he will definitely be alerted. Moreover, with your mana, how long can you watch?" The cultivator thought about it and felt that it made sense, so he asked, "Senior apprentice brother, do you have a countermeasure?" The skinny Taoist said, "The Shuyang water can only cover our tracks for 2 hours. We can't just sit here and wait. Why don't we go a little closer?" The strange-looking cultivator hesitated for a moment. He knew that doing this was dangerous, and if he made a mistake, he could lose his life. However, his desire to gain merit prevailed, so he agreed. Following the sound, he stealthily steered the flying shuttle toward the area where the two were fighting. Du Bogeo had the help of the elixir jade, so although the Shenhuang giant hand was fierce, it did not touch him. But just as he dealt with it, he saw the giant hand turn into clouds of yellow smoke and disperse, then reassemble in the sky. He could not help but frown. He knew his own situation well, and relying on the formation to fight had its advantages and disadvantages. It was more than enough to defend, but not enough to attack. If he did not disperse the surrounding fog as soon as possible and find his opponent, this situation of passively taking a beating was destined to continue. Based on Zhang Yan's endless tricks, he would be forced to reveal his cards sooner or later. Thinking of this, he spat out the elixir jade and let go of the Shenhuang giant hand. Then he took out 8 pieces of talisman paper from his sleeve. This was called the Divine Talisman of Morality. It could bring order out of chaos, calm spiritual vigor, and break all kinds of illusory formations. Holding it in his palm, he chanted a few incantations, and the talisman paper floated with the wind, disappearing into the fog. Not long after, the thick fog around them gradually dispersed. This time, Zhu Bogeo immediately saw Zhang Yan's figure. He immediately pulled back his bowstring and shot 3 arrows into the sky. Zhang Yan watched the arrow light coming over and smiled. His body did not move, but a mighty wave of water came surging over from beneath his feet. With a surge, the arrows that were flying toward him were swept away. At the same time, he flicked his finger, and with a rumble, a bolt of lightning shot down. Zhubogeo's expression turned cold. He took out a long-handled golden crow roar from his bag, and with a loud roar he pushed upwards and blocked the lightning. Then he swung his head, and the two long jade-like whiskers at the corners of his lips suddenly extended 1,000 feet, curling upwards like long whips. These two whiskers were natural oddities on his body. After hundreds of years of being watered with external medicine and refined with internal blood essence, they had become incomparably tough. Even if it was a profound-level weapon in front of him, if it was not a high-grade one, a single whip would shatter it into pieces. Its spiritual vigor would dissipate, and it would become an ordinary item. If it struck a person, a light hit would break their bones and tendons, and a heavy hit would cause them to die. Zhang Yan cast 2 more bolts of strong thunder, but the whiskers swung through the air and dispersed the thunder chi with 2 popping sounds. He could tell that there was a trick to this thing, and after some thought, he decided not to fight it head-on. Instead, he used the art of shifting, and his escape technique suddenly escaped from his original spot. He reappeared a mile away just now. He took out his hand and absorbed a wisp of spiritual vigor. After a brief examination, he knew that there was a strange chi suppressing the surroundings, and he would not be able to cast the chi fog for at least 2 hours. His eyes flashed, and he pulled his body up, rushing toward the second layer of heaven. Zhubogeo saw that he had suddenly disappeared, and was puzzled. But not long after, he saw a purple cloud appear above his head, and then spread outwards at an extremely fast speed. The sound of muffled thunder came from the sky. At first, it was indistinguishable, but after it occupied hundreds of miles of the sky, the sound became grand and loud, and the roar reverberated, as if the sky was collapsing. This is the heavenly thunder of purple clouds? He felt his scalp tingle as he listened, and a deep shudder rose in his heart. For tens of thousands of years, the demon cultivators of the North Underworld continent had fought with the Qinsong school many times. Even though he had never seen this supernatural power, he had long heard of its might. Although he already had a way to deal with it, he had never thought that after this technique was used, the thunder chi could cover the sky for hundreds of miles. The ferocity of its momentum could be said to be earth-shattering. How could he dare to take on such a great supernatural power head-on? Without even thinking, he hurriedly hid in the golden beryllium formation. Once he arrived at the formation, he sat down cross-legged, took out a handful of pills, and stuffed them into his mouth. Without chewing, he raised his head and swallowed them whole. Then he made a hand seal and circulated all the magic power in his body to support the formation. Not long after, layers of formation chi spread over and formed a thick cocoon. When the heavenly thunder of purple clouds appeared, the 2 demonic cultivators 100 miles away were caught in the crossfire. Although the 2 of them had already entered the Yuaning realm, that was because they had relied on the help of their sex and not their own proper cultivation. Moreover, their skills were all in the art of escape and detection, and their own skills were not deep. Just hearing the thunder, they were already vomiting blood. The strange-looking cultivator had a look of terror on his face. He clutched his chest and said, "Senior brother, hurry up and leave this place." After saying that, he also coughed up a few mouthfuls of blood. The skinny cultivator didn't have time to speak. He endured the waves of thunder that shook his internal organs and forcefully circulated his magic power to drive the shuttle. But after turning a few rounds, he discovered to his shock that the heavens, the earth were covered by a layer of lightning net, and there was no way to escape at all. The 2 of them never expected that taking a risk would actually cause them to be trapped in such a predicament. Instantly, despair arose in their hearts, but they were unwilling to resign themselves to death. They frantically took out all the magic treasures they carried with them, wanting to resist this attack. Zhang Yan stood in the second heaven with his hands behind his back and looked down. He only glanced at the shuttle in the distance and didn't pay any more attention to it. When he circulated his magic power to the extreme, he raised his hand and pointed down. In an instant, thousands of lightning bolts tore the sky apart. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.